My husband whipped me 25 times because his silver-tongued mistress claimed I pushed her. As blood soaked my shirt, I did not cry. I picked up my phone and called the billionaire father I had hidden from the world. Dad, I said, destroy his life. 5 minutes later, the financial empire my husband loved more than me vanished into thin air. Let me tell you how a battered wife dismantled a tech executive, a venture capitalist, and a jealous sister without shedding a single tear. My name is Alyssa, 33 years old, and my back was currently on fire. The heavy leather belt struck my shoulder blades for the 25th time, sending a blinding flash of white-hot agony radiating down my spine. I was kneeling on the imported Italian hardwood floor of the Manhattan penthouse I shared with my husband. Tristan towered over me, his chest heaving with exertion, his face contorted into a mask of righteous fury. He held the belt tightly in his right fist, his knuckles white from the strain of delivering the blows. Across the room, leaning against the sleek marble doorframe of our master bedroom, stood Kendra. She was 26 years old, employed as Tristan's executive assistant, and currently playing the role of a traumatized victim to absolute perfection. Kendra clutched her arm, forcing large crocodile tears to spill down her perfectly contoured cheeks. She whimpered softly, claiming that I had intentionally shoved her down the spiral staircase in a fit of jealous rage. It was a complete fabrication, a meticulously crafted lie designed to provoke the exact violent reaction Tristan was currently displaying. I had barely walked through the front door from a grueling business trip before Kendra threw herself onto the floor and started screaming for help. Tristan did not ask for my side of the story. He did not check the security cameras that I knew for a fact were disabled. He simply unbuckled his belt and dragged me to the floor. "You pushed her!" he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the penthouse. "You are nothing but a pathetic mid-level consultant who cannot handle the fact that I am outgrowing you. You think because you helped me pay rent 5 years ago that you own me. You are nothing without me, Alyssa. You are lucky I even let you live in this space." He threw the belt onto the floor and walked over to the glass coffee table. He picked up a thick stack of legal documents and threw them directly at my bleeding face. The pages scattered across the floor, stark black text on crisp, white paper. "Sign the divorce settlement," Tristan demanded, pacing back and forth with frantic, aggressive energy. "My lawyer drafted it this morning. You get 0 assets. You get 0 equity in my company. You leave with the clothes on your back and nothing else. If you fight me on this, I will tell the police you assaulted Kendra, and I will make sure you spend the next 10 years rotting in a jail cell." I stayed on my knees, letting the metallic taste of blood pool in my mouth where I had bitten my own lip to stop from screaming. I did not cry. Crying was for victims, and I had just decided that my time as a victim was officially over. I slowly reached out and picked up the signature page of the divorce settlement. I looked at the bottom line where my name was printed. I spat a mouthful of blood directly onto the signature line, staining the pristine paper with a bright crimson splatter. Tristan stared at me, his eyes widening in shock at my absolute defiance. "You crazy witch," he muttered, taking a threatening step forward. "What is wrong with you?" I ignored him completely. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I unlocked the screen and went to my contacts. For 5 years, I had hidden my true identity from Tristan. I wanted a man who loved me for my mind and my heart, not a man who wanted access to the Preston Holdings empire. I had introduced myself as a simple mergers and acquisitions consultant from a working-class background. I had told him my father was a retired mechanic living in a trailer park in Ohio. I had played the supportive, financially modest wife while he built his financial technology startup from scratch. I had watched him grow increasingly arrogant, abusive, and unfaithful as his company gained market valuation. I had endured his narcissism because I believed in the sanctity of marriage. That belief died with the 25th lash of his belt. I pressed the call button on the only favorite contact in my phone. Alexander Preston answered on the first ring. The billionaire titan of Wall Street, known for destroying corporations before breakfast, spoke with his usual gravelly authority. "Alyssa," he said simply. "Dad." I replied, my voice eerily calm despite the blood dripping from my chin. "I concede. You were right about him. Do exactly what we agreed upon. Destroy his life." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the blood-stained divorce papers. Tristan burst into loud theatrical laughter. Kendra joined in, walking over to wrap her arms around his waist. "You called your deadbeat dad?" Tristan mocked, shaking his head in disbelief. "What is a retired mechanic going to do, Alyssa? Is he going to drive his pickup truck to New York and hit me with a wrench? You are so delusional. You are living in a fantasy world. Sign the papers and get out of my penthouse before I completely lose my patience." I slowly pushed myself up from the floor, ignoring the searing pain in my back. I looked Tristan directly in his eyes, offering a cold, razor-sharp smile. "I do not need to sign anything, Tristan. And you are about to realize that you do not own a penthouse. You do not own a company, and you do not own my life." I adjusted my torn blazer and waited. The clock was ticking. My father was a man of his word, and on Wall Street, Alexander Preston could execute a financial massacre in exactly 5 minutes. I just had to stand there and watch the execution unfold. Tristan continued to mock me, entirely unaware of the invisible guillotine suspended directly above his neck. He wrapped his arm around Kendra, pulling her close while gesturing broadly to the panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Look around you, Alyssa," he gloated. His chest puffed out with unearned pride. "I am the chief executive officer of a technology firm valued at $400 million. We are preparing for an initial public offering that will make me a billionaire by the end of the fiscal quarter. I have venture capitalists begging to take my meetings. I have politicians inviting me to charity galas. You are a low-level corporate drone who analyzes spreadsheets for a meager salary. You actually thought calling your trailer park father would intimidate me. You have completely lost your grip on reality." Kendra chimed in, resting her head against his shoulder. "She is just jealous, baby. She knows she is aging and dried up. She knows she cannot compete with me, so she is throwing a childish tantrum. Just call the building security and have them throw her out on the street where she belongs." I did not respond. I simply kept my eyes fixed on the digital clock displayed on the microwave in the open-concept kitchen. 3 minutes had passed. Tristan walked over to the kitchen island and poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon, acting as though he had already won the war. He took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the taste of his perceived victory. "You should have just been a good, quiet wife," he lectured me, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. "If you had just accepted your place, I might have let you keep your cheap little sedan and maybe paid your rent for a few months. But now, you get absolutely nothing." 4 minutes passed. I crossed my arms, fighting through the stinging pain in my lacerated skin, and maintained my unnerving smile. "Why are you smiling?" Tristan snapped, his irritation flaring again. "Stop looking at me like that." Before he could hurl another insult, his customized smartphone began vibrating violently against the marble countertop. The ringtone echoed sharply through the tense silence of the penthouse. Tristan glanced at the caller identification, and his smug expression immediately shifted to a look of mild annoyance. "It is my chief financial officer," he muttered to Kendra. "Probably just a routine compliance question about the new funding round." He picked up the device and answered with his typical arrogant drawl. "Make it quick, I am handling a personal garbage disposal issue right now." The voice on the other end of the line was so loud and panicked that I could hear it clearly from 10 feet away. Tristan, the chief financial officer, screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. "We are ruined! Everything is gone!" Tristan froze, the glass of bourbon halting halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about? Calm down and speak English. The anonymous lead investor, the one providing the $200 million bridge loan for our expansion, they just pulled out. They did not just back out. Tristan, they triggered a hostile penalty clause in the preliminary contract. They called in our outstanding debts." Tristan blinked rapidly, trying to process the information. That is impossible. They cannot just trigger a penalty clause without cause. We have legal protections. Legal protections do not matter when the Securities and Exchange Commission freezes your accounts. The chief financial officer yelled, the sound of absolute chaos and shredding paper audible in the background of his call. The federal regulators just locked down our entire corporate treasury. The banks are rejecting our credit lines. We cannot make payroll tomorrow. We cannot pay our server hosting fees. The company valuation just dropped to zero in less than 60 seconds. The board of directors is already calling an emergency liquidation meeting. We are dead, Tristan. We are completely dead. The crystal glass slipped from Tristan's fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor and sending expensive bourbon splashing across his leather shoes. His knees buckled under the weight of the catastrophic news, and he collapsed onto the floor. The phone still pressed to his ear as the dial tone buzzed mindlessly. Kendra rushed to his side, her fake victim persona, dropping instantly as panic set in. "Baby, what is wrong?" she asked, shaking his shoulder. "What happened to the money?" Before Tristan could formulate a coherent sentence, a massive, thunderous crash shattered the heavy wooden double doors of the penthouse. Splinters of wood flew across the foyer as 4 heavily armed New York Police Department officers stormed into the residence, their tactical boots stomping loudly against the imported flooring. "Police Department hands where we can see them," the lead officer shouted, his hand resting firmly on his holstered weapon. He marched directly toward Tristan, who was still kneeling helplessly in a puddle of spilled liquor. "Tristan Hughes, you are under arrest for felony domestic assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Tristan stared blindly at the officers, his brain completely short-circuiting from the dual shock of absolute financial ruin and imminent incarceration. "Wait!" he stammered weakly as the officers forcefully grabbed his arms and wrenched them behind his back, securing the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. "There is a mistake. I am a chief executive officer. You cannot arrest me. I am rich. You are currently bankrupt," I corrected him, stepping forward into his line of sight. "And you are going to prison. Have a wonderful evening, Tristan." As the officers began dragging a sobbing, hyperventilating Tristan toward the ruined doorway, Kendra pulled out her phone. She did not look at her ruined lover. She frantically dialed a number. "Do not worry, babe," she yelled after him, her voice dripping with desperate calculation. "DeAndre is already wiring your bail money. We will fix this." I watched them drag him away, analyzing the name she had just dropped. DeAndre. The puzzle pieces perfectly aligned. The sterile, glaring fluorescent lights of the emergency room beat down on my face as I sat on the edge of the examination table. A young, visibly nervous attending physician was carefully suturing the deepest laceration on my left shoulder blade. The topical anesthetic had barely dulled the intense burning ache that radiated across my skin, but I remained perfectly still, refusing to offer a single flinch or gasp of pain. My mind was already calculating my next moves, analyzing the intricate web of corporate and familial betrayal that had just been exposed. Kendra mentioning DeAndre was the exact variable I needed to understand the full scope of Tristan's arrogance. DeAndre was my brother-in-law, married to my half-sister Monica. He was a highly aggressive, sharp-suited venture capitalist who utilized his marriage to the Preston family as a weapon to intimidate lesser firms into submission. The fact that Kendra knew his personal contact information meant the betrayal ran far deeper than a simple workplace affair. The heavy door to my treatment room swung open violently, slamming against the medical supply cart. Monica marched into the room, her designer stiletto heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She wore a pristine, white-tailored suit that perfectly highlighted her curated, wealthy aesthetic. Directly behind her stood DeAndre, a towering, imposing figure in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his face set in a mask of calculated fury. Neither of them paused to ask about my physical condition. Neither of them looked at the bloody bandages gathering in the medical waste bin. Monica crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing with pure, unfiltered resentment. You always have to ruin everything, do you not? She hissed, her voice dripping with venom. You could not just handle your domestic issues quietly. You had to involve the police and destroy a massive corporate entity. You are so incredibly selfish, Alyssa. You are acting exactly like you did when you manipulated the admissions board to steal my spot at Yale University. I looked at her over my shoulder, allowing the doctor to finish taping the final gauze pad to my back. I did not steal your spot, Monica. You failed your entrance examinations because you spent your senior year partying in the Hamptons, and Tristan whipped me 25 times with a leather belt. I am fairly certain reporting a violent felony is not an act of selfishness. DeAndre stepped forward, physically blocking my view of his wife. He pulled a thick, legally binding non-disclosure agreement from his leather briefcase and slammed it onto the examination table beside me. He tapped the signature line with an expensive fountain pen. I do not care about your marital squabbles, Alyssa, he stated, his deep voice vibrating with absolute authority. My venture capital firm has spent the last 8 months preparing Tristan's financial technology company for a massive initial public offering. We have secured global buyers. We have leveraged millions of dollars in underwriting fees. Your little revenge stunt with the police is causing a media scandal that threatens my payout. You will sign this non-disclosure agreement. You will retract your police statement, and you will claim your injuries were the result of a clumsy fall down the stairs. I stared at the legal document, feeling a cold, dark amusement bubbling in my chest. You want me to lie to the federal authorities and drop assault charges against a man who tried to permanently disfigure me just so you can secure a commission check? DeAndre leaned down, resting his large hands on the table, invading my personal space in an attempt to project dominance. You do not understand how the real world works, little consultant. Business is business. Tristan is a valuable asset. You are a disposable mid-level employee. Sign the document, drop the charges, and I will personally write you a check for $100,000 to help you find a new apartment. It is more money than you have ever seen in your life. Do not let your emotions destroy a billion-dollar merger. Monica scoffed loudly from the corner of the room. She is too stupid to understand business, DeAndre. Just force her to sign it. She has always been a jealous, pathetic loser who wants to drag everyone down to her miserable level. I slowly buttoned up my ruined, blood-stained blouse, ignoring the sharp pull of the fresh stitches. I looked DeAndre directly in his eyes, refusing to shrink away from his aggressive posture. I am not signing your non-disclosure agreement, DeAndre, and I am not dropping the charges. Tristan belongs in a cage, and if your initial public offering burns to the ground because you chose to back a violent criminal, then that is simply bad business acumen on your part. DeAndre's confident expression twisted into a malicious, arrogant smirk. He stood up straight, buttoning his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate motion. I figured you would be stubborn, he said, his tone dripping with condescending superiority. That is why I did not wait for your permission. I already wired the bail money to the precinct. Tristan is walking out of the holding cell right now, but that is not the best part. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second document, this one bearing the official seal of a local magistrate judge. He tossed it onto my lap. While you were sitting here bleeding, my legal team contacted a judge who owes me a very large favor. We filed an emergency petition on behalf of Kendra. That is a court-ordered restraining order, Alyssa. It states that you are an unstable, violent aggressor who attacked an innocent assistant. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of Tristan, Kendra, and your own penthouse. If you try to go home, you will be arrested for violating a court order. You have absolutely nothing. I picked up the court-ordered restraining order, scanning the heavy legal jargon and the glaring signature of the corrupt magistrate judge. DeAndre had genuinely orchestrated a masterful legal blockade in record time, utilizing his extensive network of compromised officials to turn the victim into the aggressor. He had successfully weaponized the justice system to protect his financial investment. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary woman with a standard corporate salary would have been entirely crushed by this maneuver. She would have been rendered homeless, terrified, and legally paralyzed. Fortunately for me, I was not an ordinary woman. Monica marched closer to the examination table, her face illuminated by a cruel, deeply satisfied grin. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. "You thought you were so clever calling the police?" She taunted, her voice rising in pitch. "But you always forget that real power requires real money. DeAndre and I have money. We have connections. You are just a pathetic consultant who plays with spreadsheets. You really thought you could destroy my husband's massive corporate merger and walk away unscathed. We are going to bury you, Alyssa. We are going to make sure you never work in this city again." I slowly folded the restraining order into a neat square and placed it into my jacket pocket. I looked at Monica, maintaining my completely emotionless composure. "I am not the one who is going to be buried, Monica. And I highly suggest you check your husband's stock portfolio before you start bragging about his financial power." Monica frowned, confused by my lack of panic. Before she could formulate another insult, she pulled a third document from her designer handbag. She waved it in the air like a victorious flag. "You really are delusional," she sneered. "That is exactly why I took precautions. You are clearly suffering from a severe psychological breakdown. You attacked an innocent woman, you filed false police reports against your loving husband, and you are displaying deeply erratic behavior. Therefore, as your older sister and recognized next of kin, I have utilized the medical proxy documents our family signed years ago to make a command decision regarding your health." DeAndre chuckled darkly, stepping back to let his wife take the spotlight. "You really stepped into a trap this time, Alyssa." Monica unfolded the document and presented it to the attending physician, who had been standing silently in the corner, looking extremely uncomfortable. "Doctor, my sister is experiencing a violent psychotic episode. I have the legal medical proxy authorizing me to make medical decisions on her behalf. I am officially signing the paperwork to place her under an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold. She needs to be heavily sedated and transferred to the secure psychiatric ward immediately for her own safety and the safety of the public." The young doctor looked at the paperwork, visibly sweating. "Ma'am," he stammered, reading the forged signatures, "this document appears legally binding, but standard protocol requires a psychiatric evaluation before we can forcefully admit a patient against their will." "I do not care about your standard protocol," DeAndre snapped, using his intimidating stature to pressure the young physician. "I sit on the advisory board of 3 major pharmaceutical companies that supply this hospital. You will process the psychiatric hold right now, or I will ensure your medical license is revoked before the end of your shift. Call the orderlies and get her strapped to a gurney." The doctor, terrified of losing his career to a powerful venture capitalist, immediately pressed the emergency call button on the wall. Within seconds, 2 large, muscular hospital orderlies rushed into the treatment room carrying heavy canvas restraints. They looked at the doctor for instructions. "Secure the patient," the doctor ordered, weakly pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is being placed under a mandatory 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold. Prepare a sedative injection." The orderlies moved toward me, their expressions hardened and ready for a physical altercation. Monica watched with absolute glee, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of completely dominating her younger sister. DeAndre crossed his arms, smiling like a predator who had just secured his prey. I did not fight. I did not scream. I did not attempt to run toward the door. I simply raised my left wrist and tapped the screen of my custom smartwatch. The device was directly linked to the central operating server of the hospital network. I bypassed the standard security protocols and opened a live, 2-way video communication feed directly to the hospital's executive boardroom, where the board of directors was currently holding their quarterly financial review. The small screen illuminated, showing the stunned faces of 12 senior hospital executives. I projected my voice clearly and authoritatively, ensuring the microphone caught every single word. "Gentlemen," I announced to the executives on the screen, "I am currently sitting in examination room 4. There is a junior attending physician and 2 orderlies preparing to illegally sedate me and hold me against my will, based on a forged medical proxy provided by my sister." I paused, letting the silence stretch for a dramatic second. Are you absolutely sure you want your staff to strap down the woman who personally owns 51% of this hospital's parent holding company? The orderlies froze in their tracks, looking down at my smartwatch in utter confusion. The young doctor turned pale, his jaw dropping open. Monica and DeAndre exchanged a bewildered glance, entirely failing to comprehend the magnitude of what I had just said. Over the smartwatch speaker, the frantic voice of the chief hospital administrator echoed into the tiny room. Ms. Preston, the administrator, shouted, his voice trembling with sheer panic. "Please wait, do not let anyone touch you. I am coming down there right now. Halt all procedures immediately. That is an absolute order." The heavy doors of the emergency room practically flew off their hinges as the chief hospital administrator, a balding man in a severely rumpled suit, sprinted into the treatment room. He was completely out of breath, panting heavily as he shoved his way past the two frozen orderlies. He immediately placed himself between me and the medical staff, holding his hands up in a defensive, protective posture. "Stand down right now!" the administrator roared at the young doctor, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "If any of you lay a single finger on Ms. Preston, I will not just terminate your employment, I will personally ensure you face federal kidnapping charges. Get out of this room immediately." The orderlies did not wait for a second command. They dropped the canvas restraints onto the floor and practically ran out into the hallway. The young doctor looked as though he was about to physically faint, clutching his clipboard like a shield as he backed away into the corridor, stammering incoherent apologies. Monica stared at the administrator, her carefully curated, arrogant expression shattering into absolute confusion. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shrill and unhinged. "She is a consultant. She does not own anything. I have the legal medical proxy. You have a forged document that is worth less than the toilet paper in the public restroom," the administrator snapped back, adjusting his glasses while trying to regain his professional composure. "This hospital is a subsidiary of Preston Holdings. Ms. Alyssa Preston is the sole heir and majority shareholder of the entire healthcare network. I suggest you leave before I call the federal authorities to arrest you for attempting to illegally institutionalize a corporate owner." DeAndre's eyes widened, the realization hitting him like a freight train. He looked at me, then at Monica, his formidable venture capitalist persona crumbling under the weight of the massive power dynamic shift. "Preston Holdings," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "You told me she was cut off from the family fortune. You told me your father hated her." Monica looked genuinely terrified, backing away toward the door. "I did not know," she stammered defensively. "Dad always said she was a disappointment. He always said she was working a low-level job to learn a lesson." I slowly slid off the examination table, adjusting my jacket to cover the fresh bandages on my back. I walked directly toward DeAndre, closing the distance between us. "My father is a ruthless man, DeAndre," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, despite the venom behind my words. "He wanted to test my resilience before handing over the keys to the empire. He wanted to see if I could survive in the corporate trenches without relying on his name. I survived. Monica just spent her entire life assuming I was weak because I chose to be quiet." DeAndre swallowed hard, realizing he had just threatened the woman who essentially controlled the entire financial ecosystem his venture capital firm relied upon. "Alyssa, we can talk about this. The initial public offering is still viable. We can renegotiate the terms." I did not bother responding to his pathetic backpedaling. I simply walked past him, exiting the hospital room with my head held high. The administrator followed closely behind me, offering continuous apologies that I completely ignored. I had more pressing matters to attend to. I stepped out of the hospital into the crisp New York air and hailed a private black car service. I directed the driver to take me straight back to the penthouse. The court-ordered restraining order sitting in my pocket was legally active, but I knew exactly how to bypass the restrictions using corporate property laws. When I arrived at the luxury residential building, I bypassed the standard elevator and used my secure access code to summon the private owner's lift. I rode the elevator to the top floor in total silence, mentally preparing for the confrontation. The elevator doors chimed and slid open, revealing the expansive foyer of my penthouse. Tristan, having been released on bail, thanks to DeAndre's money, was standing in the center of the living room. Kendra was beside him, humming happily as she aggressively shoved my designer clothes and personal belongings into cheap black plastic garbage bags. Tristan looked up, seeing me step out of the elevator. His face immediately contorted into a mask of triumphant rage. He marched toward me, waving the restraining order in the air. "Are you illiterate, Alyssa?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the vaulted space. "You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of this residence. You are violating a direct court order. I am calling the police right now and having you arrested for trespassing. Get out of my penthouse." I walked over to the kitchen island, completely ignoring his frantic yelling. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, took a slow sip, and leaned against the marble counter. "You do not own this penthouse, Tristan," I stated calmly. Tristan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I signed the lease agreement, you delusional witch. My name is on the primary documentation. I pay the monthly maintenance fees. This is my property, and you are a criminal trespasser." He pulled out his phone, ready to dial the emergency dispatch. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I tossed it onto the kitchen island, letting it slide perfectly into his line of sight. "You signed a lease agreement with a corporate shell company named Apex Residential Properties," I explained, watching his eyes dart toward the document. Apex Residential Properties is a fully owned subsidiary of Preston Holdings, and I am the chief executive officer of that subsidiary. Tristan froze, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. Kendra stopped stuffing my clothes into the garbage bag, her fake eyelashes fluttering in confusion. "You do not own the lease, Tristan," I continued, my voice sharp as broken glass. "You are a tenant, and as the chief executive officer of the property management firm, I am officially executing the emergency eviction clause based on your felony assault charge, which violates the morality clause of the building bylaws. You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my property, or I will have the building security forcefully throw you into the street." Tristan stared at me, sheer denial replaced by dawning horror that his sanctuary was a cage built by my family. He looked at the eviction document on the counter chest, heaving as reality crashed into him. The great chief executive officer was suddenly a squatter facing expulsion. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "Your 10 minutes started a minute ago," I reminded him. "Pack faster. Building security is definitely not known for their gentle or polite handling of unwanted trespassers with fresh felony assault charges." Tristan opened his mouth to scream, fists curled, but Kendra stepped in front of him. The weeping victim was gone. She reached into her handbag, retrieved a manila envelope, and slapped it onto the island. "You are incredibly arrogant, Alyssa," Kendra sneered, adjusting her perfectly styled blonde hair. "You really thought you could just confidently walk right in here, throw around your powerful father's corporate weight, and leave Tristan with absolutely nothing. But you underestimate my husband." I raised an eyebrow. "Husband? A fascinating leap of logic for a mistress." Kendra laughed. "Oh, you did not know," she mocked, waving a document from the envelope. "Tristan is not your husband anymore, Alyssa. You are literally nobody to him." Tristan's posture straightened. Fear vanished from his eyes, replaced by a toxic surge of confidence. He wrapped his arm around Kendra's waist. "Show her the signature page, baby," he ordered. Kendra flattened the document against the countertop. I scanned the bold black lettering. It was not a divorce settlement. It was a decree of absolute annulment. "You see," Alyssa, Tristan gloated. "I have known for weeks you were hiding something. I hired a private investigator last month. He found massive gaps in the story you sold me, so I took preemptive legal action. The judge signed it this morning, citing fraudulent inducement." By defining our marriage as a fraud built on hidden assets, Tristan bypassed the divorce process entirely. "A divorce means dividing assets," Tristan explained. "A divorce means I might pay you alimony, or you could claim the wealth I secured before my company collapsed. But an annulment means our marriage never existed. You were never my wife. Because you committed fraud by hiding your billionaire status, I owe you zero financial consideration. I am legally insulated from your family's corporate retaliation." You cannot touch my personal accounts or my offshore crypto wallets. You get nothing from me. We won, Alyssa. Kendra vibrated with excitement. Tristan is walking away with his fortune completely intact, and you cannot do a single thing about it. Take your eviction notice and get out before we call the police. I stared at the annulment decree. I looked at Tristan's smug face and at Kendra, who firmly believed she had secured a perfect life of endless luxury. And then I burst into laughter. It was a loud, echoing laugh that filled the penthouse. I laughed until the fresh stitches on my back screamed in protest. The sheer stupidity of the man standing in front of me was breathtaking. Tristan's smile vanished, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Stop laughing," he demanded, slamming his hand against the counter. "There is nothing funny about this. You lost." I wiped a tear of amusement from my eye. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Oh, Tristan," I breathed, shaking my head. "You should have hired better corporate lawyers instead of focusing on family court loopholes." I dialed a new number, putting the call on speakerphone and setting the device directly on top of his annulment decree. Preston Holdings Legal Department, Jonathan speaking. "Jonathan." "It is Alyssa," I said cheerfully. "I need you to confirm the status of the $50 million loan we issued to Tristan Hughes' financial technology startup 3 years ago." Tristan went rigid. Kendra looked back and forth between us, her facade cracking. "Yes, Miss Preston," Jonathan replied. "The $50 million loan was issued with a standard marital asset immunity clause. As long as Mr. Hughes was legally married to you, his personal assets were shielded from corporate seizure. The company could fail, but his personal bank accounts and offshore assets were protected by his status as your legal spouse." I smiled at Tristan, watching the blood drain from his face for the second time today. "And what happens if that marriage is legally annulled, Jonathan? What happens if the marriage legally never existed?" "If the marriage never existed, then the marital asset immunity clause is retroactively voided." Jonathan delivered the fatal blow. "Mr. Hughes is reclassified as a hostile corporate debtor. Since his company defaulted on the loan this morning, when the accounts were frozen, Preston Holdings has the immediate legal right to seize all his personal assets to recover the $50 million. I leaned closer to the phone, never breaking eye contact with Tristan. "Thank you, Jonathan. I just received visual confirmation that the annulment was signed by a judge this morning. The marriage is void. Execute the personal asset seizure immediately. Drain everything." "Understood, Ms. Preston," Jonathan said. "Initiating asset seizure protocols now. Have a good evening." The call ended. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. I looked at Kendra, who was staring at the annulment decree as if it were a venomous snake. Then I looked at Tristan, whose body was shaking with the catastrophic realization of what he had just done to himself. "You wanted to be legally insulated from me, Tristan," I whispered. "You wanted to prove how much smarter you were. You willingly stripped away the only legal shield protecting your personal wealth from my father's corporate machine. You handed me the keys to your offshore accounts." Tristan stumbled backward, hitting the refrigerator. "No," he gasped, his voice barely functional. "No, that cannot be legal. You cannot take my personal money." "I already did," I stated calmly, checking the expensive silver watch on my left wrist as the final seconds ticked away. "Your 10 minutes are officially up. You are no longer my husband. You are no longer a chief executive officer. And as of 60 seconds ago, you are completely, irrevocably broke. Pick up your garbage bags and get out of my building. You played a dangerous game of chess with a family that owns the entire board. Checkmate, Tristan." The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corporate boardroom, casting long shadows across the mahogany table. Tristan stood at the head of the room, looking nothing like the untouchable chief executive officer from the night before. His designer suit was deeply wrinkled, likely because he had slept in his car after security forcibly escorted him from my building. His eyes were bloodshot, darting nervously around the room as he faced the emergency assembly of his board of directors. He was personally bankrupt, practically homeless, and entirely desperate to retain the only asset he thought he still controlled: his financial technology startup. Sitting directly across from him, exuding absolute dominance, was my brother-in-law, DeAndre. DeAndre had convened this emergency meeting under the guise of an investor bailout. In reality, he was executing a ruthless hostile takeover. He leaned back in his leather chair, a customized gold pen twirling between his fingers, watching Tristan sweat with pure amusement. DeAndre wanted to absorb Tristan's proprietary algorithm into his own venture capital firm for a fraction of its actual worth. He was circling Tristan like a vulture waiting for the final breath. And sitting in the velvet-lined guest chair, acting as though she were the Queen of Wall Street, was my half-sister Monica. She had accompanied DeAndre to revel in Tristan's downfall, entirely unaware of the bloodbath that was about to occur. Monica wore a tailored crimson dress, but my eyes immediately locked onto her neck as I watched the live security feed from my private vehicle downstairs. Resting against her collarbone was a brilliant teardrop diamond necklace. It was a Preston family heirloom, a piece I kept locked in a highly secure vault at my estate. She had actually broken into my private vault during the chaos of my hospital visit and stolen it. She sat there gently touching the diamonds, practically glowing with unearned arrogance. "We need to vote on the acquisition immediately," DeAndre announced, his deep voice cutting through the tense silence of the boardroom. "The corporate accounts are frozen. The servers will go offline in exactly 4 hours. My firm is offering a $10 million buyout. That covers the immediate liabilities and keeps the remaining employees from filing class action lawsuits against you. You take the deal, Tristan, or you face federal charges for corporate negligence." Tristan slammed his hands onto the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. "$10 million is a blatant insult," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "My core algorithm alone is worth $2 billion. The source code is revolutionary. You cannot just steal my life's work because of a temporary liquidity issue caused by my vindictive ex-wife. I just need a bridge loan. I have another angel investor lined up. They are reviewing the pitch deck right now." DeAndre laughed, a harsh booming sound that echoed off the glass walls. "You do not have an angel investor, Tristan. You are radioactive. No legitimate financial institution is going to touch a chief executive officer facing felony domestic assault charges. Take the $10 million. It is the only lifeline you have left." Monica chimed in, swirling a glass of sparkling water. "You really should listen to my husband, Tristan. He is offering you charity. You should be grateful. After all, you were foolish enough to marry my pathetic sister. This is just the cost of your own poor judgment." Tristan glared at Monica, his face flushing with rage, but he had no leverage. He was entirely cornered. He looked down at the acquisition papers DeAndre had slid across the table. His hand hovered over the gold pen. He was seconds away from signing away his entire empire for pennies. Then the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding thud. The room fell into an immediate, breathless silence. The security guards stationed at the entrance instantly stepped aside, lowering their heads in deep respect. Walking through the doorway was Alexander Preston. My father wore a sharp midnight blue suit, his presence commanding absolute authority. He did not look at the board members. He did not look at the frantic financial charts displayed on the monitors. He simply walked with the heavy, measured steps of a man who owned the very air in the room. Tristan dropped the pen, his eyes widened in absolute shock and sudden desperate hope. He recognized the billionaire titan immediately. DeAndre leaped out of his leather chair, practically tripping over his own feet to stand at attention. The arrogant venture capitalist was instantly replaced by a sycophantic subordinate. "Mr. Preston," DeAndre stammered, frantically buttoning his suit jacket. "What an incredible honor! We were not expecting you. I assure you my firm is handling the restructuring of this asset perfectly. Your investments are completely secure." Tristan shoved past his own board members, rushing toward my father with a pathetic, eager smile. "Mr. Preston," Tristan begged, holding out a trembling hand. "You must be the anonymous angel investor. Thank goodness you are here. My company is on the verge of revolutionizing the financial sector. I just need a small capital injection to bypass this temporary freeze. I can guarantee you a massive return on investment." My father did not shake Tristan's hand. He did not even acknowledge Tristan's existence. He walked right past the disgraced executive, treating him like an invisible piece of furniture. Alexander Preston moved directly to the head of the long mahogany table. He looked at the current chairman, who practically scrambled out of the way in pure terror. My father reached out and pulled the heavy, high-backed leather chair away from the table. He turned toward the open doorway, ignoring the stunned executives staring at him. "Take a seat, daughter," my father said, his voice echoing with undeniable power. The boardroom doors opened wider. I stepped into the room. I looked into Tristan's terrified eyes, offering him a razor-sharp smile before I took my seat. I settled into the heavy leather chair, resting my hands on the polished mahogany table. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. DeAndre stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked from me to my father Alexander, and back again, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality unfolding before him. "What is this?" Monica shrieked, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was shrill and panicked. "Dad, why did you give her your chair? She is just a pathetic consultant. Tell your security guards to throw her out of this building immediately." Alexander ignored her completely. He stood firmly behind my chair, resting his hands on the backrest in a gesture of absolute unyielding endorsement. He looked at the executives gathered around the table with cold, calculating eyes. "Mr. Preston." DeAndre stammered, his confident, aggressive venture capitalist veneer shattering completely. "I do not understand what is happening here. My venture capital firm manages over $500 million of your corporate funds. You entrusted me with managing your exclusive investments because I married your eldest daughter. I am family. Why is she sitting in the chairman's seat?" I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "You really are terrible at conducting basic due diligence," DeAndre Vesser said, keeping my tone entirely conversational. "Did you ever actually read the fine print of the massive capital injections your firm received over the past 3 years? Did you ever check the signature of the authorizing executive on those wire transfers?" DeAndre frowned, his breathing growing shallow as panic set in. "The funds came directly from the Preston Holdings Executive Trust," he replied defensively. "They were authorized by the Chief Operating Officer of Corporate Acquisitions." "That is correct," I smiled. "And what exact name was printed on that signature line?" "A Preston," DeAndre said, his voice dropping a full octave as the devastating realization finally hit him. He turned his head to look at my father, then slowly turned his gaze back to me. "Alexander Preston, Alyssa Preston," I corrected him sharply, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "I have been the Chief Operating Officer of Corporate Acquisitions for the last 5 years. I personally approved every single dime your venture capital firm ever received. I own your entire operation, DeAndre." DeAndre stumbled backward, his hip hitting the edge of the large conference table. The formidable African-American businessman, who built his entire reputation on ruthless, aggressive acquisitions, suddenly realized he was nothing more than a disposable employee on my payroll. "That is impossible!" Monica screamed, her face turning a blotchy bright red. "Dad always said I was the favorite child. He told me I was going to inherit the entire company. He told me Alyssa was a miserable failure who had to work a low-level job to learn the value of a dollar. You told me she was completely cut off from the family fortune." My father finally spoke, his voice cold and entirely devoid of any paternal warmth. "I told you exactly what you wanted to hear, Monica. You are lazy, entitled, and completely devoid of any real business acumen. You spent your entire trust fund on designer clothes, luxury vacations, and funding your husband's highly aggressive business ventures. I needed an heir who understood how to survive in the corporate trenches. I needed someone ruthless enough to protect the massive empire I built from nothing." He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "I sent Alyssa to work at a mid-level consulting firm under an assumed background to see if she could climb the corporate ladder without using my powerful name. She did not just climb the ladder. She bought the ladder, sold it for a massive profit, and built a skyscraper. She earned this seat. You just married the loudest man in the room and hoped he would do all the hard work for you." Monica started crying loudly, gripping the stolen diamond necklace tightly around her neck. "This is not fair. I am the oldest sister. I deserve half of the company." "You deserve exactly what you earned," I told my sister, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "Which is absolutely nothing." I turned my attention back to DeAndre, who is currently sweating profusely through his custom-tailored suit. Your venture capital firm is entirely propped up by Preston Holdings Capital, DeAndre. You used my money to fund Tristan's financial technology startup. You thought you were pulling off a brilliant hostile takeover today. You thought you were going to buy his ruined company for a pathetic $10 million and absorb his technology to make yourself a billionaire. DeAndre swallowed hard, refusing to meet my intense gaze. Alyssa, we can negotiate. We are family. I can offer you a premium seat on my board. We can take his financial technology public together. There is no together, DeAndre, I stated firmly. I am calling in your corporate debts right now. Your firm is effectively bankrupt as of this morning. You played a very dangerous game with my money, and you lost everything. Tristan, who had been standing frozen at the end of the table, suddenly saw an opening. His narcissistic brain convinced him he still held a winning hand. He stepped forward, slamming his hands onto the polished wood. "Wait!" Tristan shouted, a desperate, wild look in his eyes. "You can take my personal accounts, Alyssa. You can freeze the corporate funds. You can bankrupt DeAndre. But you still desperately need me. My startup holds the exclusive patent to the most advanced predictive trading algorithm on the market. That algorithm is worth $2 billion. I wrote the core framework myself. The intellectual property is registered under my name. If you want to make a profit, you have to keep me on board. You have to reinstate my funding," Tristan demanded. I looked at Tristan. I leaned back and smiled. "About that algorithm, Tristan," I said. I gestured to the massive digital display mounted on the far wall of the boardroom. I pulled a sleek silver remote from the pocket of my blazer and pressed a single button. The heavy motorized blinds lowered instantly, casting the room into sharp shadows, and the projector hummed to life. The screen illuminated, displaying crisp security footage from inside Tristan's private executive office. The timestamp in the corner flashed in bright red numbers, indicating a date from exactly 3 weeks ago. Tristan squinted at the screen, his desperate smile faltering as he recognized his own office. "You installed hidden cameras in my corporate headquarters?" Tristan asked, his voice shaking with sudden paranoia. "That is highly illegal. When you borrow $50 million from Preston Holdings, you sign a clause granting our risk management division full auditing access," I replied smoothly. "We always protect our investments. And thank goodness we do, because your security protocols were pathetic. Watch the screen, Tristan. Pay very close attention to your billion-dollar asset." The high-definition video played in complete silence, but the actions unfolding on the screen screamed louder than words. The footage showed Tristan leaving his office and closing the door behind him. 10 seconds later, Kendra slipped into the frame. The loyal executive assistant and devoted mistress looked around nervously before rushing straight to his computer terminal. Kendra gasped, stumbling backward until her spine hit the glass wall of the boardroom. "No," she whispered, her hands flying to cover her mouth. On the screen, Kendra expertly bypassed Tristan's biometric locks. She pulled a high-capacity encrypted hard drive from her designer handbag and plugged it directly into the mainframe. A progress bar appeared on the monitor in the video, rapidly filling as she downloaded the entirety of Tristan's proprietary predictive trading algorithm. Tristan's face drained of all color. He looked from the screen to Kendra, his chest heaving as the horrific reality of the situation began to process in his narcissistic brain. "What are you doing in that video, Kendra?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, guttural growl. "Tell me what you are doing on my computer." "It is a deep fake," Kendra shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the long mahogany table. Her perfect victim persona evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. "She is trying to frame me. Alyssa hired some tech genius to fabricate this video because she is jealous. Tristan, you have to believe me. I would never betray you. I love you." I pressed another button on the remote. The video paused on a crystal-clear, zoomed-in frame of Kendra's face, illuminated by the computer monitor reflecting the exact lines of the source code. Next to the video, a series of financial documents appeared on the projection screen. "These are offshore wire transfer records," I announced to the silent captive audience. 2 days after Kendra copied your proprietary source code onto that hard drive, she boarded a flight to Macau. She met with representatives from a major rival technology firm based in Shenzhen. They paid her $4 million in untraceable cryptocurrency in exchange for the complete framework of your predictive trading algorithm. Tristan staggered backward, clutching his chest, as if he had just been physically shot. The algorithm was his entire leverage. It was the only reason his company had any market value. Without exclusive rights to the source code, his startup was completely worthless. You sold it. Tristan roared, a sound of pure primal agony tearing from his throat. My life's work. You sold my entire future for $4 million. I did not do it. Kendra sobbed, backing away toward the heavy oak doors. It is a lie. She is manipulating the data. I clicked the remote one final time. A high-resolution photograph of Kendra sitting at a table in Macau, physically handing the encrypted hard drive to a foreign tech executive, flashed onto the screen. Tristan snapped. The thin veneer of the polished chief executive officer completely disintegrated, leaving behind only the violent, abusive monster I knew intimately well. He lunged across the space separating them, grabbing Kendra violently by the throat and slamming her against the glass wall. Kendra gagged her hands, frantically clawing at his thick fingers as he squeezed her windpipe. You ruined me! Tristan screamed, spittle flying from his lips as he shook her like a rag doll. I gave up everything for you. I beat my wife for you. I am going to kill you. The boardroom erupted into absolute chaos. The remaining board members jumped out of their leather chairs, shouting in alarm. My father, Alexander, did not move a single muscle. He remained standing behind my chair, watching the violence unfold with cold, detached precision. DeAndre sprang into action. The imposing venture capitalist sprinted across the room, grabbing Tristan by the shoulders and forcefully ripping him away from Kendra. Security, DeAndre bellowed toward the hallway. Get in here and restrain him. Two heavy-set corporate security guards rushed into the boardroom, grabbing Tristan by the arms and forcing him face down onto the expensive carpet. Tristan thrashed wildly, screaming obscenities at Kendra, who had collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air and clutching her bruised neck. DeAndre stood over them, fixing his suit jacket and breathing heavily. He looked at me, shaking his head in disgust. You brought a circus into my boardroom, Alyssa. DeAndre sneered, trying to reclaim his shattered authority. Tristan is a violent lunatic and his assistant is a corporate thief. But that does not change the fact that this merger can still be salvaged. We can sue the rival firm for intellectual property theft. We can recover the algorithm. I slowly stood up from the chairman's seat. I buttoned my white blazer and walked around the mahogany table, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. I stopped right in front of DeAndre. You are missing the most important piece of the puzzle, DeAndre, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. I suggest you look at the projection screen one more time. Look very closely at the name of the rival firm that purchased the stolen code from Kendra. DeAndre frowned. He turned his head and squinted at the wire transfer records displayed on the massive screen. His eyes traced the routing numbers and the corporate shell entities until he found the ultimate parent company of the buyer. The color vanished from DeAndre's face. His jaw went completely slack. DeAndre, you might want to check the buyer's name on that wire transfer, because Kendra did not just steal from Tristan. She stole from you. DeAndre snapped his head back toward the massive digital display. His dark eyes darted frantically across the routing numbers and corporate shell entities listed on the wire transfer document. He traced the complex web of offshore accounts until he reached the ultimate parent company of the buyer, reading the specific corporate registration aloud in his head. The color completely drained from his face. The trap was so perfectly laid, and he had walked right into it, blinded by his own greed and his relentless need to impress the Preston family. You sold the proprietary source code to Apex Global Innovations, DeAndre whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of sheer terror and unadulterated rage. He looked at Kendra, who was still cowering on the floor, clutching her bruised throat. You sold the algorithm to the exact rival firm that has been aggressively shorting my entire venture capital portfolio for the past 6 months. Kendra whimpered, pressing herself flat against the glass wall. I did not know who they were, she cried out defensively. They just offered me the cryptocurrency. Tristan was never going to leave his wife for me. I needed the money to secure my own future. DeAndre let out a sound that was half scream, half hollow laugh. Your future, he roared, his booming voice vibrating through the polished mahogany boardroom, causing the crystal water glasses to shake. You just destroyed my entire life to secure your pathetic future. Apex Global Innovations did not just buy the algorithm outright, they deliberately weaponized it against my firm. They used Tristan's predictive trading framework to anticipate every single market move my fund was planning to make for the rest of the year. That is why every startup I backed this quarter went bankrupt. That is why my institutional investors have been threatening to pull their capital. He grabbed the back of his leather chair, his knuckles turning white as he struggled to remain standing. His sharp, aggressive venture, capitalist persona completely dissolved, leaving behind a desperate, ruined man. I am holding over $400 million in toxic assets. DeAndre gasped, his chest heaving, as the catastrophic financial reality fully materialized in his mind. My firm is not just effectively bankrupt. I am going to face federal investigations for losing the pension funds of my primary investors. The Securities and Exchange Commission will tear my entire operation apart. They will seize my personal assets, my properties, everything I own. Because of a cheap, greedy executive assistant, my entire legacy is absolutely worthless. He spun around, his furious gaze locking onto his wife. Monica was sitting frozen in the VIP row, her hand clutching the stolen diamond necklace resting against her collarbone, as if it could somehow protect her. The arrogant smirk she had worn since entering the building was completely wiped away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated dread. This is all your fault, DeAndre snarled, taking a threatening step toward her. Monica flinched, her eyes widening in genuine shock. Excuse me, she snapped back, her voice shrill and defensive. How is this my fault? I did not tell that little tramp to steal the code. You forced me to back his garbage company, DeAndre yelled, pointing a shaking finger directly at Tristan's face, who was still pinned to the carpet by my security guards. You told me Tristan was a certified genius. You told me that funding your brothers-in-law would solidify my position within the Preston family. You constantly manipulated me, claiming that elevating Tristan would prove to your father that we were the ultimate corporate power couple. I trusted your judgment. DeAndre continued, his voice dripping with pure disgust as he stepped closer to his wife. I ignored the red flags. I ignored the pathetic revenue models because you swore Tristan was sitting on a gold mine. You just wanted to parade around your country club and brag about how you discovered the next big tech unicorn. You used my firm to fund his lifestyle, and you brought a corporate thief right into my inner circle. You are nothing but a spoiled, incompetent liability. Monica gasped, her face flushing with profound humiliation. Her perfect, curated image as the superior older sister was being publicly shredded by her own husband in front of the entire board of directors. How dare you speak to me like that? She shrieked, jumping up from her chair. I gave you access to this world. You were just a mid-level analyst when I found you. I gave you the Preston name. You gave me a poisoned chalice. DeAndre spat back, entirely abandoning any pretense of marital loyalty. You have absolutely no business acumen. You have no talent. The only reason you have anything is because of your last name. And now, thanks to your monumental stupidity, I am going to lose everything I worked my entire life to build. I am filing for divorce the second I walk out of this building. I am not letting you drag me down with your sinking ship. Monica snapped. The pristine, composed socialite completely lost her mind right there in the boardroom. She grabbed the crystal glass of red wine sitting on the table next to her and hurled the dark liquid directly into DeAndre's face with a vicious, guttural scream. The dark red stain spread rapidly across his chest, a stark visual representation of his ruined career and his ruined marriage. You are nothing without me, Monica screamed hysterically, her chest heaving as she glared at the man she had sworn to love. I will ruin you, DeAndre. I will make sure you never work on Wall Street again. DeAndre wiped the wine from his eyes, his expression turning terrifyingly cold. You cannot ruin a man who has already been destroyed, he whispered maliciously. Monica realized she was completely losing control of the situation. Her husband was bankrupt and threatening divorce. Her chosen protege Tristan was facing felony charges. She spun around, her desperate eyes searching the room until they landed on the one man who had always bailed her out of her reckless mistakes. She ran toward the head of the boardroom table, tears streaming down her face as she threw herself at our father. "Dad," she begged, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. "Dad, you have to fix this. DeAndre is acting crazy. Tristan made a mistake, but we can salvage the company. You have to wire emergency funds to DeAndre's firm. You have to bail us out. We are your family. You cannot let us lose everything. Please, Dad, just sign the authorization papers." Alexander Preston looked down at his eldest daughter. His expression remained entirely devoid of emotion. He did not reach out to comfort her. He did not offer a reassuring smile. He simply adjusted his midnight blue suit jacket and turned his head slightly to look directly at me. Alexander looked back at Monica and spoke with cold, absolute finality. "I do not sign authorization papers anymore, Monica. She is the chairman now. Her word is law. You will have to face her directly. But knowing your sister, I highly doubt she will show you any mercy whatsoever." Monica stared at our father in absolute disbelief. The reality of his words hung in the sterile air of the boardroom, severing the last thread of hope she had desperately clung to. The man who had funded her extravagant lifestyle, covered up her reckless mistakes, and validated her inflated sense of self-worth, was completely washing his hands of her. She was entirely on her own, and she was entirely at my mercy. I remained seated in the chairman chair, resting my chin on my steepled fingers. I watched a drop of sweat roll down the side of Monica's perfectly contoured face. Her breathing was shallow and erratic. She looked at DeAndre, who was still paralyzed by his own financial ruin, and then she looked back at me. The arrogant, untouchable golden child was completely cornered. "Alyssa," Monica stammered, her voice dropping an octave as she attempted to adopt a conciliatory, pleading tone. "We are sisters. We share the same blood. We grew up in the same house. You cannot just stand by and watch my entire life fall apart. You have the power to fix this. You can reverse the asset freeze on DeAndre's firm. You can authorize a bailout. Please just sign the paperwork." I stood up slowly, pushing the heavy leather chair back. I walked around the massive mahogany table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. I stopped just a few feet away from her. "You want me to authorize a bailout?" I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously soft. "You want me to save the husband who just publicly humiliated you, and you want me to use my corporate authority to protect the lifestyle you built on my stolen opportunities. That is a fascinating request, Monica, especially considering how you treated me when you thought I was nothing but a disposable consultant." "I did not mean those things I said." Monica lied instantly, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I was just stressed. You know how competitive this environment is. I was trying to protect the family image." "Protect the family image?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You spent your entire life tearing me down to make yourself look taller. When I secured the internship at Morgan Stanley, you called the hiring director and claimed I had a substance abuse problem, so they would rescind the offer. When I bought my first apartment, you convinced our father it was located in a dangerous neighborhood, so he would cut my security allowance. You constantly took what was mine because you could never actually earn anything for yourself." "That is not true!" Monica shrieked, her defensive instincts overriding her panic. "I am the oldest daughter. I was groomed for high society. I had a public image to maintain. You were always hiding in the background, reading financial reports and wearing cheap suits. You never cared about luxury or status. I was simply claiming the things that suited my position in the family." "Like the jewelry you are currently wearing?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. Monica froze. Her hand instinctively flew up to her chest, her fingers curling protectively around the brilliant teardrop diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. The color completely drained from her face. I took a step closer, my eyes locked directly onto the glittering stones. "That is a very beautiful piece, Monica. The cut is unmistakable. Custom platinum setting, flawless teardrop center stones surrounded by a halo of rare pink diamonds. It looks incredibly expensive. Where exactly did you get it?" Monica swallowed hard. her chest heaving as she backed away until she hit the edge of the conference table. "My husband bought it for me." She lied, her voice trembling. "DeAndre gave it to me for our anniversary. It is none of your business." DeAndre, who was still standing near the projection screen, looked over in sheer confusion. "I did not buy that for you," he said, his voice laced with venom. "My credit cards have been maxed out for 3 months, trying to cover the margins on Tristan's failing company. Do not drag me into another one of your pathetic lies." Monica's eyes widened in absolute terror. She looked around the boardroom, realizing every single executive security guard and family member was staring directly at her neck. "You did not get it from your husband," I said, my voice echoing with lethal precision. "And you certainly did not buy it yourself, considering your personal accounts have been overdrawn since last week. So let me tell you exactly where you got it, Monica. You walked into my private estate yesterday afternoon while I was in the hospital bleeding from a brutal assault. You used your family access code to bypass the front gate, told my security detail you were picking up clothes for me, and you walked straight into my master bedroom. You bypassed the biometric lock on my personal vault, using a copied fingerprint from a glass I drank from at Thanksgiving. And you stole it." "I did not steal it," Monica screamed completely, losing whatever remained of her sanity. She yanked her hand away from the necklace, her face contorted with greedy, unapologetic entitlement. "It belongs to the Preston family. It is a heritage piece. I am the oldest daughter. I deserve to wear the best jewelry. You keep it locked away in the dark like a hoarding peasant. You do not even attend galas. You do not appreciate it. I have a high-profile corporate merger to attend today. I needed to project wealth. I was simply taking what rightfully belongs to my side of the family." "You just admitted to breaking and entering in grand larceny," I stated calmly, crossing my arms. "You broke into my secure vault and took a necklace without my permission. Your justification regarding who deserves it is completely legally irrelevant." Monica scoffed a desperate, arrogant sound. "Call the police then, Alyssa. What are they going to do? Arrest a Preston for borrowing a family necklace. It is a civil dispute. No prosecutor is going to touch a domestic squabble over jewelry. You cannot prove I took it with malicious intent. You cannot prove anything at all." I reached into the pocket of my white blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen and opened a highly encrypted security application. "You are right, Monica," I agreed smoothly. "A standard police officer might view this as a petty family dispute. But you see, I do not buy standard jewelry. When you hold the keys to a billion-dollar financial empire, you take certain precautions with your physical assets, especially when you have a kleptomaniac sister who has a long history of pawning family heirlooms to pay off her husband's bad investments." I pressed a single bright red button on my phone screen. Instantly, a piercing, high-pitched beep began to emit directly from the center of the diamond necklace currently resting on Monica's chest. The sound was sharp and rhythmic, pulsing every 2 seconds like a digital heartbeat. Monica shrieked, clawing frantically at her neck as if the diamonds had suddenly caught fire. She tried to unfasten the platinum clasp, but her hands were shaking so violently she could not manipulate the complex locking mechanism. "What is that sound?" She panicked, pulling at the heavy chain. "Make it stop. How are you doing this?" I smiled, letting the rhythmic beeping fill the tense air of the boardroom. "That is a military-grade global positioning system tracker, Monica. I had it custom-built into the platinum casing behind the center stone. It is directly linked to my security network and the Federal Registry of High-Value Assets." Monica stopped pulling at the chain, her eyes widening in absolute horror. "That necklace is appraised at $3 million. I continued, delivering the final devastating blow. "You stole it from my vault in New York and you wore it on a private jet to attend this board meeting here in New Jersey. You just transported $3 million of stolen interstate property across state lines. That is a federal offense." The beeping of the global positioning system tracker continued to echo off the glass walls of the corporate boardroom. The rhythmic, high-pitched sound was a digital countdown to Monica's absolute destruction. She stood frozen at the edge of the mahogany table, her manicured hands trembling violently as they hovered over the stolen diamond necklace. The arrogant, untouchable golden child of the Preston family had finally run out of excuses. She looked around the massive room with wild, panicked eyes, desperately searching for a single sympathetic face among the gathered executives. She found absolutely none. Even our father Alexander remained perfectly still behind my heavy leather chair, his face a mask of cold, calculating indifference. He was watching his eldest daughter face the brutal, unavoidable consequences of her own unadulterated entitlement. "Alyssa, you have to turn it off right now," Monica pleaded, her voice cracking as the horrifying reality of the situation crushed her lungs. "You are just trying to scare me. You made your point. Just turn off the alarm and I will give the expensive necklace back to you immediately. We can pretend this entire incident never happened. I am your sister. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to a federal prison over a simple piece of jewelry." I remained seated in the chairman chair, leaning back, with a look of total serenity. "I cannot turn it off, Monica," I stated calmly, lacing my fingers together on the polished wood. "The tracker is permanently hardwired into the Federal Registry of High-Value Assets. The exact moment I activated the emergency beacon, it automatically transmitted an automated distress signal directly to the regional office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They do not treat the blatant theft of $3 million of interstate property as a simple family misunderstanding. Before Monica could process the magnitude of my words, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open for the third time this morning. The private corporate security guards stationed at the entrance were instantly pushed aside by 4 men and 2 women wearing dark professional suits and tactical bulletproof vests. The gold lettering on their navy blue jackets clearly identified them as federal agents. They marched into the room with aggressive synchronized precision, completely taking over the corporate space. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a deeply stern expression, scanned the room quickly. His sharp eyes bypassed Tristan, who was still pinned to the carpet by my security team. He completely bypassed DeAndre, who was sweating profusely through his tailored charcoal suit. He walked directly toward the source of the high-pitched beeping. Monica Preston, the lead agent, announced loudly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. "You are under arrest for grand larceny and the illegal interstate transport of stolen high-value property. Turn around and place your hands behind your back immediately." Monica let out a blood-curdling shriek. She backed away frantically, hitting the projection screen hard enough to make the massive display rattle. "No!" she screamed, pointing a visibly shaking finger directly at me. "She is lying to you? She gave it to me. It is a prestigious family heirloom. I am a Preston. You cannot arrest me like a common criminal. Do you know who my father is? He owns this entire financial building. He will have your badge for this outrage." The federal agent did not even blink at her pathetic display of unearned entitlement. He closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides, grabbed her wrist with forceful authority, and spun her around. He pinned her arms firmly behind her back, entirely ignoring her frantic, hysterical sobbing. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists with a sharp, definitive click. "Dad." Monica wailed, dark tears destroying her perfect makeup as the agent began reading her Miranda rights. "Dad, do something. Call your elite lawyers. Tell them I did not steal it. DeAndre, please help me. Tell them I am your wife." Alexander Preston simply turned his head, refusing to look at his eldest daughter as she was forcefully dragged away from the wall. But DeAndre reacted exactly as I knew he would. The ruthless, opportunistic venture capitalist immediately calculated his own survival. He saw his wife being arrested for a massive federal crime, and he instantly decided to cut the dead weight to save his sinking ship. DeAndre stepped forward, smoothing the front of his wine-stained suit jacket. He raised his hands in a gesture of complete surrender and total cooperation, looking directly at the lead federal agent. "Officer, I want to make it absolutely clear that I had zero knowledge of my wife's criminal activities," DeAndre stated firmly, his deep voice projecting across the quiet room for everyone to hear. "I am a highly respected, successful venture capitalist. I operate with strict corporate integrity. I just discovered she stole that necklace right here in this room. In fact, given her illegal actions and the massive financial liability she now presents to my firm, I am officially declaring my intent to file for immediate divorce. I want my personal private assets fully separated from her legal mess." She acted entirely alone here today. Monica stopped struggling against the agent's grip. She stared at the man she had married, her mouth hanging open in pure, unadulterated shock. DeAndre had just thrown her to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. He was willing to let her rot in a federal penitentiary if it meant he could protect his remaining bank accounts. "You cowardly traitor," Monica screamed at him, her voice hoarse and broken. "I gave you everything. I brought you into this wealthy family." DeAndre ignored her completely. He offered the federal agent a slick professional smile, attempting to charm his way out of the disaster. "I will be fully cooperative with your investigation regarding her theft, agent. But if you will excuse me, I need to go contact my divorce attorneys and salvage what is left of my business." DeAndre took a confident step toward the boardroom doors, truly believing he had successfully navigated the wreckage. The lead federal agent did not step out of his way. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a second pair of steel handcuffs. The agent shook his head at DeAndre, completely shattering the venture capitalist's arrogant facade. "You are coming too, sir," the agent said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "We have substantial evidence of massive wire fraud connecting your venture capital firm to illegal offshore accounts." DeAndre froze, the blood draining from his face as he stared at the handcuffs. "Wire fraud," he stammered weakly. "I do not know what you are talking about. My accounts are perfectly clean." I stood up from the chairman's seat, walking slowly toward the center of the room. "Your accounts were clean, DeAndre," I corrected him, savoring the look of sheer terror in his eyes. "Until I tipped off the Securities and Exchange Commission about the illicit funds you funneled through the Cayman Islands to float Tristan's failing tech startup. When you play with my money, I monitor every single transaction. Have fun sharing a cell block with your new brother-in-law." The massive heavy oak doors of the corporate boardroom swung shut with a loud thud, sealing out the chaotic noise of federal agents and panicking executives. The space that had just been the epicenter of a massive corporate bloodbath was suddenly completely silent. DeAndre was gone. Monica was gone. The board members had scattered like cockroaches, running from a sudden light. The only people remaining in the room were my private security detail standing quietly by the walls, myself sitting comfortably in the chairman's seat, and Tristan. Tristan was still on the floor where my guards had previously pinned him. He slowly pushed himself up to a sitting position, his expensive designer suit now covered in carpet lint and wrinkled beyond repair. The man who had whipped me 25 times just 2 days ago looked utterly broken. His arrogant, untouchable tech executive persona had been entirely stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a human being. He looked around the empty boardroom, his bloodshot eyes darting frantically as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. His offshore accounts were drained, his personal bank accounts were seized. The predictive trading algorithm, the crown jewel of his entire existence, had been sold to a hostile rival. His venture capital funding had just been arrested by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He had absolutely nothing left. "Alyssa," Tristan whispered, his voice cracking violently in the quiet room. I did not respond. I simply watched him, my expression perfectly neutral, my hands resting lightly on the polished mahogany table. He swallowed hard, his chest heaving rapidly as he desperately struggled to draw a full, steady breath. He looked at the empty chairs, then back at me. The realization that I was the only person left who held any power over his fate finally broke his pride. Tristan dropped to his knees. The proud, narcissistic man who had commanded boardrooms and belittled my career began to crawl across the expensive carpet toward me. "Please," Tristan sobbed, the sound pathetic and wet as tears streamed down his face. "Please, Alyssa, you have to help me. I have absolutely nothing. They took absolutely everything. My accounts are at zero. My credit cards are declining. I cannot even afford a hotel room tonight. You cannot just leave me like this. We were married for 5 years. We built a life together. You destroyed that life," I reminded him, my voice steady and completely devoid of sympathy. "You filed for an annulment. You declared that our marriage never existed. You wanted to make sure I walked away with absolutely nothing. I simply returned the favor." "It was not me," Tristan cried out, crawling closer until he reached the edge of the table near my chair. My security guards immediately tensed, taking a step forward, but I raised a single hand to wave them off. He was just a desperate, ruined man seeking a lifeline. I did not want to do any of this, Tristan begged, looking up at me with desperate, tear-filled eyes. It was Kendra. She manipulated me, Alyssa. She got into my head. She kept telling me you were holding me back, that you were jealous of my success. She convinced me to file the annulment. She orchestrated the entire thing. I tilted my head, studying his weeping face. And the 25 lashes with your heavy leather belt, I asked, keeping my tone deadly quiet. Did Kendra wrap your hand around that belt? Did she force you to swing it down on my back until I bled onto your pristine floor? Tristan flinched, his face twisting in genuine panic. She lied to me, he screamed, his voice echoing shrilly. She threw herself down those stairs and told me you tried to kill her. I was just reacting to her lies. I was defending her because she played the victim. I was out of my mind with stress from the initial public offering, and she pushed me over the edge. I would never have hurt you if she had not manipulated the situation. You know me, Alyssa. You know my real heart. I am a good man. I just made a terrible mistake. Please, you have to forgive me. I will do anything. I will publicly apologize. I will go to counseling. Just give me my company back. Please give me my life back. I listened to his pathetic excuses, feeling a profound sense of disgust. He was entirely incapable of taking responsibility for his own violent actions. He was perfectly willing to beat his wife when he thought he held all the power, and now he was perfectly willing to blame his mistress when he realized he had lost. I pushed my heavy leather chair back and slowly stood up. Tristan looked up at me, hope flickering in his bloodshot eyes, genuinely believing his tears had managed to sway my emotions. He thought I was still the quiet, supportive woman who had paid his rent and endured his arrogance. I slowly walked around the long edge of the large mahogany table until I was standing directly in front of him. I slowly knelt down, bringing my face perfectly level with his. I could smell the stale sweat and fear radiating from his skin. The fresh stitches on my back pulled sharply with the movement, a searing physical reminder of exactly why I was in this room. I reached into the pocket of my tailored white blazer. I pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper currency. I held the single green dollar bill between my index and middle fingers, letting Tristan stare at it. I finally let it go. The $1 bill fluttered through the air, landing softly on the carpet right between his trembling knees. "Pick it up, Tristan," I said softly, my voice completely cold and empty of any mercy. "Pick it up, because that is exactly what I'm buying your company for right now today." Tristan stared at the crumpled green bill lying on the carpet between us, as if it were a venomous snake. His bloodshot eyes snapped up to meet mine, flashing with a sudden, desperate surge of defiance. He shook his head violently, pushing himself back onto his heels. "I am not selling you my life's work for a single dollar." Tristan spat, his voice rising as he tried to summon the arrogant tech executive he had been yesterday. "You are out of your mind, Alyssa. Even without the proprietary algorithm, my company has tangible assets. We have the server infrastructure, the client databases, the brand recognition. I can liquidate those assets myself and pay back your father's loan. You cannot just steal an entire corporation." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my tailored white blazer and pulled out a folded legal document. I dropped it onto the polished mahogany table directly above his head. "You never read the covenants of your corporate debt, Tristan," I explained, maintaining a perfectly level tone. "When Preston Holdings extended that $50 million loan to your startup, we included a standard key man and intellectual property clause. It explicitly states that if the core technology of the company is compromised, stolen, or devalued, Preston Holdings maintains the unilateral right to instantly recall the loan in full." Tristan scrambled up from his knees, grabbing the document off the table. His eyes frantically darted back and forth across the highlighted legal text. "Since Kendra sold your algorithm to a hostile rival," I continued, pacing slowly around the edge of the table, "your corporate valuation officially plummeted to zero at 9 o'clock this morning. Because your accounts are frozen by the Securities and Exchange Commission, you cannot repay the loan. Therefore, Preston Holdings has triggered the asset liquidation protocol. I am not stealing your company. I am foreclosing. That is impossible, Tristan yelled, his hands shaking so badly the paper rattled in his grip. You cannot do this. I will declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I will tie this up in federal court for years. You could certainly try, I agreed smoothly. But if you declare bankruptcy instead of accepting my buyout, the corporate veil shielding you is pierced. You will become personally liable for the remaining debt, the employee lawsuits, and the massive fines the federal regulators are preparing to levy against your firm for negligence. You will be broke. You will be in debt for the rest of your life. You will never be able to open a bank account, sign a lease, or hold a corporate job again. Tristan stared at me, the last remaining shred of his ego completely shattering. His catastrophic failure crushed the breath out of his lungs. He was trapped in a financial vice of my design, and there was absolutely no escape. I pulled a sleek silver pen from my pocket and set it next to the acquisition contract I had placed on the table. Sign the company over to me for $1 right now, I ordered, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. If you sign it, Preston Holdings absorbs the corporate liabilities. You walk away with a criminal record and zero assets, but you will not owe my father $50 million. You have exactly 30 seconds to decide before I rescind the offer and let the federal regulators tear you apart piece by piece. Tristan looked at the $1 bill on the floor. He looked at the acquisition contract. He looked at me, a woman he had physically beaten and verbally degraded for years. A woman he thought was nothing more than a disposable accessory to his grand, arrogant life. Tears spilled down his cheeks, dropping onto his ruined designer suit. He let out a hollow, defeated sob. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the silver pen. He leaned over the mahogany table and scrawled his signature across the bottom line of the contract, officially signing away his entire empire for a single crumpled dollar. I picked up the signed contract, examining his messy handwriting with cold satisfaction. I then picked up the dollar bill from the floor and tucked it neatly into his breast pocket. A deal is a deal, I said softly. Tristan slumped against the table, burying his face in his hands. What happens now? He wept. Do I get my severance package? Do I get to keep my stock options? I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. You no longer work here, Tristan. As the new owner of this company, my first official act is to terminate your employment effective immediately. You are fired with cause due to gross negligence and criminal misconduct. Therefore, your severance package is entirely voided and your stock options are permanently canceled. You get nothing. Now get out of my boardroom. Tristan wailed, a pathetic broken sound that echoed off the glass walls. He curled into a tight ball on the floor, consumed by his own spectacular ruin. I turned my back on him, completely finished with the man who had caused me so much pain. As I turned toward the heavy oak doors, a subtle movement caught my eye. During the intense confrontation, Kendra had been slowly, silently creeping along the glass wall, desperately trying to reach the exit and escape. She had her hand on the brass door handle, her eyes wide with terror, hoping I was too distracted to notice her slipping away into the corridor. My two private security guards stepped sideways, blocking the exit and towering over the terrified former executive assistant. Kendra gasped, stumbling backward as the guards crossed their arms, cutting off her only route of escape. I smiled, walking slowly toward her. You really thought you could sneak out, Kendra? We have not even discussed your severance yet. Kendra stood absolutely frozen between the two towering security guards. Her manicured hands trembled as her eyes darted frantically from the heavy oak doors back to my face. The crushing realization that she was completely trapped washed over her perfectly contoured features. She swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing, before she suddenly plastered on a mask of pure, desperate innocence. She took a tentative step toward me, clasping her hands together in a deeply pleading gesture. Alyssa, Kendra began, her voice quivering with manufactured vulnerability. You have to listen to me. You are a brilliant, capable woman. You know exactly how Tristan operates. You lived with him for 5 years. You know how insanely controlling and manipulative he is. I never wanted to steal that source code. I never wanted to go to Macau. He forced me to do it. I remained standing by the mahogany table, crossing my arms over my tailored white blazer. I did not interrupt her. I simply let her dig her own grave. He told me that if I did not sell the algorithm to the Chinese firm, he would ruin my entire career, Kendra continued, tears welling up in her eyes. He said he would blacklist me from every corporate office in Manhattan. He owed dangerous people a lot of money, Alyssa. He was drowning in hidden gambling debts and offshore liabilities. He used me as a disposable pawn to secure illegal capital because he was too cowardly to do it himself. I was terrified of him. I was just trying to survive in a hostile work environment. I looked down at Tristan, who was still curled in a pathetic weeping ball on the floor. He did not even have the energy to defend himself against her blatant lies. He just let out another hollow sob, completely broken by the reality that his loyal mistress was entirely willing to throw his corpse to the wolves to save her own skin. "You are an incredibly talented liar, Kendra," I said smoothly, my voice echoing in the quiet boardroom. "You play the helpless victim flawlessly. But we both know Tristan did not force you to do anything. You stole his intellectual property because you wanted a $4 million payout, and you thought you could blame the corporate espionage on his rival competitors." Kendra realized the victim narrative was failing to gain any traction. The fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by a hardened, calculating expression. The frightened girl evaporated, revealing the ruthless opportunist lurking underneath. She straightened her posture and took another step forward, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "Fine," Kendra said, her tone entirely pragmatic. "We are both intelligent women who understand how the real world works. You just orchestrated a masterful hostile takeover. You absolutely humiliated Tristan and destroyed DeAndre's venture capital firm in a single morning. That requires a level of ruthlessness that I deeply respect. I can be a massive asset to you, Alyssa. I know where all the bodies are buried. I know every single password to Tristan's hidden offshore accounts. I know the names of the politicians he illegally lobbied. I have copies of his private ledgers." She gestured toward the empty chairs around the boardroom table. "Preston Holdings just acquired this entire financial technology company. You need someone on the inside who knows the daily operations. You need a loyal executive assistant who is not afraid to get her hands dirty. Hire me. Give me a position in your corporate structure. I will hand over all of Tristan's blackmail material, and I will help you completely dismantle whatever is left of his pathetic life." I stared at her genuinely, marveling at her absolute delusion. She had just committed corporate treason, facilitated the theft of $2 billion in intellectual property, and actively participated in my physical assault. Yet she somehow believed she could negotiate a lucrative job offer out of the wreckage. "You want me to hire you?" I asked, allowing a cold, mocking smile to touch my lips. "You want me to give you a security clearance at Preston Holdings?" "I am highly capable," Kendra insisted eagerly, sensing a false glimmer of hope. "I am adaptable. And I have capital. I secured $4 million in that Macau deal. If you let me walk out of this building right now with zero legal consequences, I will transfer $2 million directly into your personal bank account. We can both walk away rich. You do not need to call the federal authorities." I slowly walked over to my leather chair and picked up a sleek black tablet resting on the table. I tapped the screen, unlocking the encrypted financial application I had been monitoring since the board meeting began. I walked back toward Kendra, stopping just inches away from her face. "You fundamentally misunderstand how my family conducts business, Kendra," I stated quietly, my eyes locking onto hers. "Preston Holdings does not hire corporate thieves. We do not negotiate with disposable mistresses, and we certainly do not accept bribes from criminals." I turned the tablet around and shoved the high-resolution screen directly into her line of sight. Kendra squinted at the digital display. The screen showed the exact interface of the anonymous cryptocurrency wallet she had used to receive the illicit funds from the Chinese technology firm. Her eyes frantically scanned the transaction ledger. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp. The balance on the screen read 0. "Where is it?" Kendra shrieked, her hands flying out to grab the tablet, but my security guards instantly grabbed her wrists, pulling her back. Where is my money? I had $4 million in that account. I slipped the tablet back into my blazer pocket. Did you really think I would not trace the crypto wallet you used for the intellectual property theft? I asked, my voice dripping with venom. I just drained it. Kendra stared at the empty space where the tablet had been just seconds before. Her perfectly manicured hands clawed at the air. My private security guards immediately released her wrists and took a synchronized step backward, treating her like a diseased animal. You cannot do that, Kendra gasped, her chest heaving as she stumbled backward on her designer stilettos. That cryptocurrency was untraceable. The executives in Shenzhen guaranteed me highest level encryption. That is my money. I earned it. You earned a federal indictment for corporate espionage, I corrected her, adjusting my white blazer. And for the record, there is absolutely no such thing as an untraceable digital asset when my father's cybersecurity division gets involved. The $4 million you received for selling my husband's algorithm has already been rerouted into a charitable fund for victims of domestic violence. Consider it a mandatory donation. Kendra looked around the sprawling boardroom, her eyes wide and wild. She looked at the mahogany table, the panoramic windows showing the Manhattan skyline, and finally at Tristan. He was still sitting on the carpet, hugging his knees, shivering in his ruined suit. The realization that she was completely destitute hit her like a physical blow. She had no penthouse, no luxury car, no millionaire boyfriend, and absolutely zero funds to hire a defense attorney when the Federal Bureau of Investigation inevitably arrived to arrest her. My security chief, a tall man named Vance, stepped forward. Ms. Preston, shall we escort these two unauthorized individuals off the corporate premises? Take them down to the main lobby, I instructed smoothly. Make sure they leave through the front doors. Vance signaled his team. Two large guards grabbed Tristan by his armpits, hauling the disgraced tech executive to his feet. He hung limply between them, offering zero resistance as they dragged him toward the heavy oak doors. Kendra did not wait to be grabbed. She marched out ahead of them, her face a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated rage. I followed closely behind, flanked by my own detail. We descended in the glass elevator, dropping 50 floors down to the massive sunlit atrium of the Preston Holdings building. The ground floor lobby was constructed entirely of marble and glass, an architectural masterpiece designed to intimidate anyone who walked through the front doors. The moment the elevator chimed and the glass doors slid open, the security guards let go of Tristan. He stumbled forward, tripping over his own expensive leather shoes, and landed hard on his hands and knees on the polished marble floor. Kendra spun around. The sycophantic sweet mistress's persona she had perfected over the last year completely dissolved. She glared down at the man she had called the love of her life just an hour ago. "Get up, you pathetic loser, Kendra," hissed her voice, echoing sharply across the cavernous lobby. "Look at you. You are absolutely pathetic." Tristan slowly raised his head. His eyes were red and swollen. "Kendra, please," he croaked, his voice raw. "We have to stick together. We have to figure out a legal defense." "Stick together!" Kendra shrieked, kicking his leg with her pointed heel. "Why would I ever stick with a bankrupt criminal? You told me you were a genius. You told me you were going to be a billionaire. You told me your company was untouchable. You are nothing but a weak, insecure little man who needed to beat his wife just to feel powerful." "I lost everything for you," Tristan yelled back, finally finding a shred of his old anger. He pushed himself up to his feet, his fists clenching at his sides. "I divorced the heiress to a financial empire because you convinced me she was holding me back. You lost everything because you are stupid," Tristan Kendra spat, stepping right into his face. "You let a 26-year-old assistant steal your entire life's work right from under your nose. Your predictive algorithm was a joke. I had to sleep with you for 8 months just to get access to that computer. Do you have any idea how miserable that was? You are terrible in bed, Tristan. You have a fragile ego, you are physically inadequate, and you cry every time your venture capitalist brother-in-law raises his voice. You are not a chief executive officer, you are a joke." Tristan's face flushed a deep, violent purple. The absolute public humiliation of having his manhood, his intelligence, and his career completely shredded by the woman he ruined his life for pushed him right over the edge of sanity. The polished corporate executive vanished, replaced entirely by the violent abuser I knew intimately. "You treacherous witch!" Tristan roared. He lunged forward. He did not slap her, he tackled her. Tristan hit Kendra squarely in the chest, sending them both crashing hard onto the marble floor of the lobby. Kendra shrieked as the impact knocked the wind out of her lungs. She fought back instantly. Kendra reached up her manicured nails, digging directly into Tristan's face, scratching deep, bloody tracks down his cheek. She grabbed a fistful of his meticulously styled hair and yanked backward violently. Tristan yelled in pain, swinging a blind fist that caught her on the shoulder. They rolled across the pristine floor, knocking over a heavy brass stanchion with a loud ringing crash. It was a visceral, ugly, pathetic physical brawl between two treacherous people who entirely deserved each other. Employees and visitors in the lobby stopped in their tracks, pulling out their smartphones to record the violent spectacle. I stood a few feet away, safely behind the invisible barrier of my security detail. An assistant handed me a freshly brewed iced coffee. I took a slow, deliberate sip, enjoying the cold, bitter taste, as I watched my abusive ex-husband and his treacherous mistress physically tear each other apart on my marble floor. Vance stepped up closely beside me, his heavy hands resting on his tactical belt. "Should I have the guards break them up, Ms. Preston?" I took another sip of my coffee, my eyes locked on the pathetic display of mutually assured destruction. I shook my head very slowly, feeling a deep, profound sense of absolute satisfaction. "No, Vance. Call the tabloids. Let them film this." The tabloids descended on the Preston Holdings lobby like a pack of starving wolves. Within 30 minutes, high-definition footage of the chief executive officer and his mistress tearing each other apart on my floor was broadcasting across every major news network. The brawl ended only when police arrived to execute Tristan's arrest warrants, dragging him away while cameras flashed. Kendra was left sobbing on the curb, completely destitute and publicly humiliated. Fast forward 24 hours. The chaotic noise of the media circus had faded into a distant, satisfying hum. I was currently sitting in the immaculate soundproof executive suite belonging to my father. Alexander Preston stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the Manhattan skyline. The atmosphere in the room was remarkably calm. It was the quiet serenity that only follows a perfectly executed corporate massacre. We did not discuss Tristan or his spectacular downfall. Tristan was already a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in financial districts. Instead, we were reviewing the morning market reports, analyzing the positive surge in Preston Holdings stock following my decisive hostile takeover. I took a sip of my black coffee, enjoying the absolute silence of the room. The silence was abruptly shattered by the sharp, imposing ring of my father's private secure telephone line. This specific line was reserved exclusively for high-level corporate emergencies and immediate family members. Alexander turned away from the window, his expression shifting into a mask of cold anticipation. He walked over to his massive oak desk and pressed the speakerphone button. An automated robotic voice echoed through the executive suite. "You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the Rikers Island Correctional Facility." My father leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the polished wood. "Accept the call," he stated firmly. The line clicked, and the frantic, hysterical voice of my older sister filled the room. "Dad," Monica screamed, her voice cracking with sheer panic and severe sleep deprivation. "Dad, you have to get me out of here right now. This place is an absolute nightmare. They put me in a holding cell with actual criminals. It smells like bleach and sweat, and they took away my designer clothes. You have to call your legal team and fix this." I remained perfectly still in my leather chair, listening to the golden child of the Preston family completely unravel. Monica sounded absolutely terrified, but beneath the terror was that familiar toxic layer of unearned entitlement. Even sitting in a federal holding cell, she genuinely believed she was above the law. Alexander did not immediately respond. He let her frantic breathing echo through the speaker for several long, agonizing seconds. "Dad, are you listening to me?" Monica shrieked, her panic escalating when she was met with silence. DeAndre completely abandoned me. That coward threw me to the federal agents and ran away to save his own miserable venture capital firm. The agents interrogated me for 6 hours about that stupid diamond necklace. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave me permission to wear it. You can make this entire case disappear. Monica. My father said, his voice deadly calm and entirely devoid of any paternal affection. I am not calling my legal team. I am not fixing this. And I am certainly not lying to federal investigators to cover up your blatant theft. There was a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? Monica demanded, her tone shifting from panic to sheer disbelief. I am your oldest daughter. You always protect me. You always bail me out when things get difficult. You cannot just leave me in this filthy cell. I protected you when you made minor mistakes, Alexander corrected her sharply. I bailed you out when you overspent your allowance or crashed your luxury cars. I did those things because I incorrectly believed you would eventually mature into a responsible adult. But you did not mature, Monica. You simply grew more arrogant, more greedy, and more malicious. I did not do anything wrong, Monica cried out violently, clinging to her perpetual victim mentality. Alyssa set me up. She deliberately left that necklace where I could find it. She triggered that alarm just to humiliate me. She is the villain here, Dad. She is trying to destroy our family. My father let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Alyssa did not force you to bypass a biometric lock. Alyssa did not force you to steal $3 million of interstate property. You made those choices entirely on your own because you believed the rules did not apply to you. He leaned closer to the speakerphone, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. You spent your entire life trying to ruin your sister because you were fundamentally lazy. While Alyssa worked grueling hours to build her career, you stole her opportunities and mocked her work ethic. You sabotaged her internships. You lied about her accomplishments. You constantly demanded the spotlight while contributing absolutely nothing of value to this family or this corporation. That is a lie, Monica sobbed defensively. I was the face of the Preston family. I maintained our social standing. You were a parasite, Alexander stated brutally, cutting off her pathetic defense. You fed off my wealth, and you fed off your sister's quiet resilience. When Alyssa was bleeding, you tried to illegally commit her to a psychiatric ward to secure a merger. You proved exactly what kind of person you are. You do not belong in a luxury estate, Monica. You belong in there. The line went dead silent for 5 agonizing seconds. I watched the speakerphone, waiting for the inevitable explosion. When Monica finally spoke, the panic was gone. Her voice was trembling, but it was laced with a venomous rage. Fine, Monica hissed, her malice bleeding through. I will sell my Preston shares to pay for a lawyer, Monica screamed. I reached across the polished oak desk and pressed the flashing button, transferring the call from the speakerphone directly to the handset. I picked it up slowly. Monica was still screaming on the other end of the line, her voice a frantic barrage of threats against our father, promising to liquidate her entire portfolio just to drag his name through the mud in a highly publicized criminal trial. I let her rant for a few moments, listening to desperation masquerading as power. You cannot ignore me, Dad! Monica yelled, the background noise of the correctional facility echoing behind her. I have 15% of the voting shares in Preston Holdings. I am a major shareholder. I will call my broker right now and dump every single share onto the open market. I will tank the corporate valuation to spite you. Do you hear me? I will absolutely burn your legacy to the ground. Dad is no longer on the line, Monica. I said, my voice perfectly level. You are speaking directly to the chairman now. The line went dead silent. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she processed my voice. Alyssa Monica spat, her tone shifting from desperate panic to pure hatred. Put Dad back on the phone right now. You deliberately set me up. You secretly planted that tracker. You are going to pay for this. Once I sell my shares and hire the best defense team in Manhattan, I am coming after you for defamation and false imprisonment. I leaned back in the luxurious leather chair, looking out at the New York skyline. You are not hiring a defense team, Monica, and you are certainly not selling your shares in Preston Holdings. "Watch me," she snarled. "I have full control of my trust fund. It is legally mine." "You have a profound misunderstanding of how our family wealth is structured," I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. "You do not possess direct ownership of any voting shares. You are merely a designated beneficiary of the Preston Family Trust. The trust holds the shares, and the trust dispenses the dividends. But more importantly, the trust is governed by a very specific set of conditions. Specifically, the morality and integrity clause." "I did not violate any morality clause," Monica shouted defensively. "I am a respected socialite. I sit on charity boards. You are currently sitting in a federal holding cell for grand larceny," I reminded her coldly. "But surprisingly, that is not the breach of contract that nullified your inheritance." "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her breathing growing shallow. "Our father built this empire on absolute competence," I stated. "When he established our trust funds, he included a mandatory academic requirement. To gain permanent access to the principal shares, the beneficiary had to legitimately graduate from a top-tier university. He wanted to ensure his wealth was managed by capable heirs, not lazy trust fund babies who bought their way through life." "I graduated from Columbia University," Monica shrieked, her voice cracking with sudden, undeniable terror. "I have a degree in art history. I met the requirements. My shares are fully vested." "You attended Columbia University for exactly 3 semesters. I corrected her, savoring the absolute destruction of her lifelong facade. "You spent your sophomore year partying in Europe. You failed every single midterm. You were placed on academic probation and subsequently expelled for chronic absenteeism. You never graduated, Monica." "That is a lie," she gasped, though the sheer panic in her voice completely betrayed her. I walked across the stage. "I have the diploma hanging in my living room. You have an expensive, meticulously crafted piece of counterfeit parchment hanging in your living room," I replied, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You paid a professional forger $50,000 to create a fake diploma. You hired a hacker to infiltrate the university database and alter your transcripts. You lied to our father. You lied to your husband. You built your entire identity on a massive academic fraud." "How?" Monica choked out her breathing, turning into rapid, erratic hyperventilation. "How do you know that?" "Because when I took over as chairman yesterday, I ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of every trust fund beneficiary," I explained calmly. "My investigators uncovered your secret in 2 hours. You forged your academic credentials to trigger the release of your trust fund dividends. That constitutes a direct intentional violation of the integrity clause." "No." Monica wailed, the sound entirely broken and pathetic. "Please, Alyssa, you cannot do this. If I do not have those shares, I am bankrupt. I cannot afford bail. I cannot afford a lawyer. They are sending me to federal prison. You have to let me access the funds. We are sisters." "We are nothing," I stated firmly, severing the final emotional tie without hesitation. "You spent 33 years treating me like garbage. You tried to force me into a psychiatric ward so your husband could steal a tech company. You stole a $3 million necklace from my private vault because you felt entitled to my property. You played a ruthless game, Monica, and you lost. As of this morning, your status as a beneficiary has been revoked. Your shares have been absorbed back into the corporate treasury. Your bank accounts are frozen. You are entirely destitute." "Please," Monica begged, crying hysterically into the receiver. "I will do anything. I will publicly apologize. I will sign whatever you want. Save your apologies for the judge," I said, my voice completely devoid of mercy. "You are going to need all the help you can get, especially since your loving husband is no longer by your side. DeAndre will figure something out." Monica sobbed, clinging to her remaining delusion. "He has his lawyers." By the way, I casually mentioned, glancing at the digital clock on the desk. "DeAndre just completely threw you under the bus to the feds to get a plea deal." The sterile walls of the federal interrogation room offered absolutely no comfort. DeAndre sat across a scratched aluminum table, facing 2 stone-faced agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and a senior investigator from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Despite the heavy steel handcuffs resting on the table and the fact that he had been in custody for the past 24 hours, DeAndre was still desperately clinging to his polished venture capitalist persona. He leaned forward, attempting to utilize every ounce of his Ivy League charm to talk his way out of a decade in federal prison. "Listen to me," DeAndre said smoothly, flashing his trademark charismatic smile. "I am a highly respected financial professional. My firm manages billions in legitimate assets. I am entirely a victim of circumstance here. I married into the Preston family believing they operated with strict integrity. I had absolutely no idea my wife was running an illicit operation behind my back. Monica is deeply unstable. She orchestrated the theft of that diamond necklace entirely on her own, and she used her family connections to manipulate the corporate structure. I was completely blind to her criminal activities until the very moment she was arrested in that boardroom. The federal agents did not say a single word. They simply watched him, their faces completely unreadable, letting him spin his desperate narrative. And as for Tristan Hughes, DeAndre continued quickening his pace to fill the heavy silence. The man is a total rogue agent. I extended venture capital funding to his financial technology startup because Monica insisted he was a genius. It was a favor to my wife. I had no idea he was running a fraudulent operation. But I can give you everything you need to lock him away forever." The SEC investigator finally raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you offering us, DeAndre?" DeAndre leaned closer, lowering his voice as if he were negotiating a private corporate merger. "I am offering you the keys to his entire financial kingdom. Tristan did not just commit domestic assault and oversee corporate espionage. He has been committing massive tax evasion for the past 3 years. I have copies of his private ledgers. I know the exact locations of the offshore crypto wallets he used to hide his personal assets from the Internal Revenue Service. I can hand over the routing numbers, the shell company names, and the digital access keys. You can seize everything he has ever stolen. Furthermore, I can testify that Monica actively helped him conceal those assets to protect her own financial interests." DeAndre paused, sitting back in his metal chair to let his offer sink in. He folded his hands together, his confidence slowly returning. He genuinely believed he had just negotiated his way out of federal prison. "I will give you Tristan. I will give you Monica. I will testify in open court against both of them. In exchange, I want full unconditional immunity from prosecution. I want the wire fraud charges against my firm dropped immediately, and I want all my personal bank accounts unfrozen by tomorrow morning." The lead FBI agent slowly closed his notepad. "That is a very generous offer, sir. But unfortunately for you, we do not have the authority to approve that kind of sweeping immunity deal." DeAndre scoffed, his arrogance flaring. "Then bring in whoever does have the authority. Call the federal prosecutor. Call the director of the agency. I am handing you the biggest corporate fraud case of the decade on a silver platter. You need my testimony to secure those convictions. Bring me the person who can sign the paperwork." The heavy steel door of the interrogation room suddenly clicked and swung open. The 2 FBI agents and the SEC investigator immediately stood up from their chairs in a gesture of deep, unprompted professional respect. DeAndre frowned, turning his head to see which high-ranking government official had arrived to negotiate his freedom. The blood instantly drained from DeAndre's face. His jaw went completely slack, and his confident posture shattered into a million pieces. I walked into the interrogation room wearing a tailored charcoal suit, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor. I did not look like a battered wife, and I certainly did not look like a woman willing to negotiate. I carried a thin black leather folder under my arm. I walked directly past the federal agents and took the empty seat directly across the aluminum table from my brother-in-law. "Alyssa." DeAndre gasped, his voice barely a terrified whisper. "What are you doing here? You cannot be in here. This is a restricted federal interrogation room. Officer, get her out of here. This is a massive conflict of interest. She is my sister-in-law." The lead FBI agent did not move to escort me out. Instead, he pulled out a chair for me. "Ms. Preston is not here as your relative," the agent stated firmly. Following the unprecedented scale of the corporate fraud uncovered at your firm and Tristan's startup, the Securities and Exchange Commission requested specialized assistance to untangle the complex web of offshore accounts. Due to her extensive expertise in corporate acquisitions and her position as chairman of Preston Holdings, Ms. Preston has been appointed as a special consultant to the federal investigation. She has full security clearance. DeAndre stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. He realized in that exact moment that the entire federal justice system was practically taking orders from the woman he had just tried to financially destroy. The realization that I was the one pulling the strings behind his prosecution completely broke his spirit. He slumped forward in his metal chair, the heavy steel handcuffs clinking against the table. "Alyssa, please," DeAndre begged, abandoning his confident facade completely. "You heard my offer. I can give you everything you need to destroy Tristan and Monica. They are the ones who hurt you. I was just trying to run a business. I got caught in the crossfire. Take the deal. Let me walk away, and I will testify to whatever you want. I will be your star witness." I placed my black leather folder onto the scratched aluminum table and slowly opened it. I did not pull out an immunity agreement. I pulled out a single sheet of paper displaying a property deed. I looked DeAndre directly in his eyes, feeling the sheer, intoxicating power of absolute control. "I do not need your testimony, DeAndre," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the small room. "My cybersecurity team already decrypted Tristan's ledgers yesterday. We already seized his hidden offshore assets, and we already handed the evidence to the federal prosecutors. You have absolutely nothing left to offer me." DeAndre shook his head frantically. "I can find more. I have contacts. I know other firms that are violating the law. I can be an asset to your holding company. Please, Alyssa. If I go to federal prison, my entire life is over. My family will have nothing. My mother relies on me for her medical care and her housing. You cannot do this to her." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold aluminum table. I stared into his terrified eyes and delivered the final crushing blow. "Your plea deal is denied, DeAndre," I said softly. "And as for your mother, you might want to call her and tell her to start packing her bags, because I just bought the bank that holds the mortgage on her estate." DeAndre stared at me, the air completely leaving his lungs. The polished, aggressive venture capitalist who had commanded boardrooms and destroyed rival firms vanished in the span of a single second. The heavy steel handcuffs rattled against the scratched aluminum table as his hands began to shake uncontrollably. His eyes, previously sharp and calculating, filled with pure, unadulterated panic. "You cannot do that," DeAndre whispered, his deep voice cracking under the weight of his sudden helplessness. "My mother has lived in that house for 30 years. She has a severe heart condition. She has absolutely nothing to do with any of this. She does not even know what a venture capital firm is. Please, Alyssa, you can take my offshore accounts. You can take my luxury cars. You can strip my entire stock portfolio, but leave her out of this disaster." I leaned back in the cold metal chair, keeping my posture perfectly rigid. "You brought her into this the second you used her residential address to register the offshore shell companies you utilized for your massive wire fraud," I stated clinically. "You turned her historic family home into a federal crime scene just to save yourself a fraction of a percent on your corporate taxes. I am not punishing your mother, DeAndre. You are." DeAndre dropped his head onto the cold table. A choked, pathetic sob escaped his throat. The federal agents standing quietly by the door watched him with absolute professional detachment. The arrogant man who had confidently walked into this interrogation room demanding sweeping immunity was now weeping openly, completely broken by the reality of his own monumental greed. "Alyssa, I am begging you," DeAndre cried out, lifting his tear-stained face to look directly at me. "I will do anything you want. I will work for Preston Holdings for free. I will be your most loyal, dedicated asset. I know the complex inner workings of every single corrupt financial technology startup on the Eastern Seaboard. I can make you billions of dollars in aggressive acquisitions. Just tell me what to do. I never even loved Monica." The federal investigators exchanged a brief, telling glance. I simply raised a single eyebrow, encouraging the ruined executive to keep digging his own grave. I only married her for the elite connections, DeAndre confessed, rapidly, desperately trying to trade his marital loyalty to secure his mother's house. I knew she was incredibly lazy and severely entitled. I knew she was a terrible, vindictive person. But she had the Preston name. She had immediate, unhindered access to the executive trust. I needed that massive capital to legitimize my firm. I am not a monster, Alyssa. I was just trying to survive in a heavily rigged system. He leaned forward against the heavy steel handcuffs, his voice dropping into a frantic, pleading register. You have no idea how hard it is to break into the upper echelons of Wall Street. I had to fight aggressively for every single scrap of professional respect. I had to work 10 times harder just to get into the boardroom because of where I came from. I used Monica because I had to level the playing field against men who were born with silver spoons. I did what was strictly necessary to secure my legacy. I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of absolute disgust. I slowly placed my hands flat on the scratched aluminum table. Do not dare use your background as an excuse for your severe lack of basic morality, I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses like a serrated blade. You did not engage in massive corporate fraud because the financial system was rigged against you. You did it because you are inherently greedy. You did not steal from rival firms to beautifully level the playing field. You stole because you desperately wanted a third vacation home in the Hamptons and a custom private jet. DeAndre opened his mouth to protest, but I immediately silenced him with a sharp, lethal glare. There are millions of people who fight through systemic barriers every single day without resorting to domestic espionage and international money laundering. I continued relentlessly. You had a prestigious degree from a top-tier university. You had a brilliant analytical mind for market trends. You could have built a legitimate, highly successful empire. Instead, you actively chose to align yourself with a lazy, arrogant woman just to siphon off my father's wealth. You actively enabled a man who violently beat his wife because it protected your impending initial public offering. You are not a victim of circumstance, DeAndre. You are just a common thief wearing a very expensive suit. DeAndre closed his eyes, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. The harsh, undeniable truth of my words completely dismantled the defensive narrative he had built around his own inflated ego. He had always viewed himself as a ruthless visionary doing whatever it took to succeed. Now sitting in a stark federal holding facility, he finally saw himself for what he truly was. He was a coward who had sacrificed his own integrity for a cheap financial shortcut. What do you want from me? DeAndre asked, his voice entirely defeated and utterly hollow. I have absolutely no leverage. I have no hidden money. My wife is going to federal prison, and my firm is completely bankrupt. Just tell me exactly what it takes to save my mother's house today. I reached into my black leather folder and pulled out a thick, binding legal contract. I slid it across the scratched aluminum table until it rested directly beneath his chained hands. I then pulled a sleek silver pen from my tailored jacket pocket and placed it meticulously beside the document. Sign away your VC firm to my charitable foundation, and I will let your mother keep her house. Refuse, and you both end up on the street. DeAndre looked at the contract. He did not read the terms. He did not ask to consult a lawyer. He simply picked up the silver pen with his trembling, handcuffed hands and scrawled his signature across the bottom line, breaking down in heavy, uncontrollable tears as he officially surrendered his entire life. I left DeAndre sobbing in the cold interrogation room. My business with the ruined venture capitalist was entirely concluded. I walked out of the federal building and stepped into my waiting town car, directing my driver to the penthouse. There was one final piece of trash to take out before the day was done. Across town, Tristan was experiencing a very different reality check. The federal judge had granted him a brief window to collect a single cardboard box of personal necessities before his formal arraignment. He arrived at my residential building flanked by 2 stern police officers. The building staff, who used to greet him with fearful reverence, now watched him with barely concealed amusement as he was escorted into the service elevator like a common criminal. Tristan stepped into the penthouse foyer, the heavy double doors closing behind his police escort. The officers instructed him to keep his hands visible and limit his gathering to basic clothing. He nodded numbly. His shoulders slumped as he shuffled into the expansive living room. The space that had served as his ultimate status symbol now felt like an untouchable museum. The imported Italian furniture, the custom art installations, the gleaming marble surfaces, everything belonged to me, and he knew it. He walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, his designer shoes scuffing against the hardwood floor he used to obsessively protect. He looked out at the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The setting sun cast a brilliant golden glow over the financial district, illuminating the towering skyscrapers where he had once believed he would rule as a billionaire tech king. He pressed his hand against the cool glass, his chest heaving with a deep, shuddering breath. The absolute magnitude of his loss washed over him. He was no longer a chief executive officer. He was no longer a respected innovator. He was just a bankrupt, violent felon with a police escort waiting by the door. A harsh sob escaped his throat as he stared at the city that had violently rejected him. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the catastrophic reality of his situation. "Are you quite finished mourning your imaginary empire, Tristan?" I asked, my voice slicing through the quiet room like a frozen blade. Tristan gasped, spinning around so fast he nearly lost his footing. He had been so consumed by his own misery that he had not even noticed me sitting on the plush velvet sofa in the center of the room. I was casually sipping a glass of iced lemon water, my posture perfectly relaxed. Spread out on the glass coffee table directly in front of me was his entire collection of luxury timepieces. 6 custom display boxes lay open, revealing millions of dollars worth of diamonds, platinum, and gold. Alyssa Tristan choked out, taking a hesitant step forward before the police officers immediately stepped up behind him, warning him to keep his distance. He raised his hands defensively. "I just came to get my clothes. The judge said I could take 1 box of personal items." "I know exactly what the judge said," I replied, gesturing to a cheap cardboard box sitting on the floor near the kitchen island. "You will find 3 pairs of standard cotton trousers, 4 plain shirts, your basic toiletries, and a pair of running shoes inside that box. I had my staff pack it for you to save time. I did not include your custom-tailored Italian suits because you purchased those using funds embezzled from my father's corporate loan. Those suits are now property of Preston Holdings." Tristan stared at the pathetic cardboard box, his jaw trembling with fresh humiliation. "You packed me cheap cotton shirts," he whispered, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. "Alyssa, I am a public figure. The media is waiting outside the courthouse. I cannot show up to my federal arraignment looking like a homeless beggar. Please just let me take 1 decent suit. Let me maintain a tiny shred of dignity." "You forfeited your right to dignity the exact second you wrapped a leather belt around your fist and beat me until I bled onto this floor," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You will wear the cheap cotton shirts, Tristan. You will stand in front of the federal judge looking exactly like the pathetic hollow man you truly are." He swallowed hard, looking away from my cold, unforgiving gaze. His bloodshot eyes drifted downward, landing on the glass coffee table where his beloved watch collection sat glistening under the ambient lights. These watches were his ultimate pride. He had spent hours bragging about their rarity to anyone who would listen, using them as tangible proof of his superiority. Tristan slowly approached the coffee table, his hands shaking as he looked at a highly exclusive diamond-encrusted platinum Rolex resting in its velvet case. He looked at the police officers who were temporarily distracted by a call coming through their radios. He looked back at the Rolex, his desperate, greedy instincts overriding his common sense. He thought if he could slip 1 watch into his pocket, he could sell it through a black market contact and hire a defense attorney. He slowly reached his hand out, his trembling fingers inching toward the platinum band. I leaned forward and slammed my hand down on the glass table inches from his fingers. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, causing him to violently flinch backward. "You really are incapable of learning a lesson," I said, looking at him with absolute disgust. Tristan panicked, raising his hands again. "I was not doing anything," he stammered quickly, his eyes darting toward the officers, who had now turned their attention back to us. I was just looking at it. That is my watch, Alyssa. I bought it last year. I picked up the heavy platinum Rolex, letting the diamonds catch the light. You bought it with funds you illegally siphoned from your startup treasury, which was entirely backed by my money. I corrected him, examining the intricate watch face. Technically, this watch belongs to me. It is a corporate asset recovered during a hostile liquidation. Tristan stared at the watch, a single tear of pure frustration rolling down his bruised cheek. He was completely trapped, stripped of every luxury he had ever stolen. I looked at the pathetic man standing in front of me. I stood up and held the platinum watch out toward him. That watch was bought with my money, I said softly, ensuring the police officers could not hear my final devastating warning. But keep it. You will need it to trade for protection in prison. I watched the color drain from Tristan's face as the police officers gripped his arms and escorted him out of my penthouse. The heavy double doors clicked shut, officially closing the chapter on a marriage built entirely on deceit and violence. But while Tristan was being transported to a federal holding cell to await his arraignment, his treacherous mistress was currently discovering the harsh reality of her own spectacular downfall. After fleeing the marble lobby of my corporate headquarters, Kendra had hailed a cab she could barely afford, directing the driver to the upscale Chelsea high-rise where she lived. The luxury condominium was a lavish two-bedroom corner unit featuring a wraparound balcony and a private rooftop garden. Tristan had rented the property for her 6 months ago, using it as their secret sanctuary. She genuinely believed that even if she lost her offshore millions, she could simply sell off the contents of the condo and comfortably survive until she found her next wealthy target. She stepped into the private elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse level. When the doors slid open, Kendra immediately froze. The entrance to her pristine condominium was completely blocked by 4 large, unsmiling men in dark tactical uniforms. A thick metal chain had been looped through the custom door handles, secured tightly with a heavy industrial padlock. Standing directly in front of the barricade was the building manager, holding a thick clipboard and looking incredibly annoyed. "What is going on here?" Kendra demanded, her voice shrill with rising panic. "Take those chains off my door right now. I need to get inside and change my clothes." The building manager did not even blink. "You do not live here anymore, miss. The rent payment bounced this morning due to frozen assets. Furthermore, the lease agreement is not registered in your name. It is registered to a corporate entity, and the chief executive officer of that entity just issued a direct order for immediate eviction due to suspected criminal activity on the premises." Kendra gasped, her hands flying to her face. "Tristan is the chief executive officer. He would never evict me." "Tristan Hughes was fired this morning," the manager corrected her smoothly. "The new owner of the corporation, Alyssa Preston, explicitly instructed us to secure the premises and seize all contents inside the unit to cover outstanding corporate debts. You have zero legal right to enter. Now please vacate the hallway before I have security forcefully escort you out." Kendra stumbled backward into the elevator, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. I had anticipated her every single move. I had not just drained her illicit cryptocurrency wallet. I had systematically dismantled her entire lifestyle, leaving her entirely destitute on the streets of Manhattan with nothing but a torn designer dress and a ruined reputation. She wandered the crowded city sidewalks for hours, her panic slowly morphing into a cold, desperate survival instinct. She refused to accept defeat. She was young, she was beautiful, and she knew exactly how to manipulate powerful men. Before she became an executive assistant and a corporate thief, Kendra had worked as an elite bottle service girl at the Obsidian, one of the most exclusive high-end nightclubs in the financial district. It was the exact place she had originally targeted Tristan. She decided her only option was to return to her roots, secure a shift, and find a new billionaire to fund her lifestyle. She walked into the service entrance of the nightclub just as the evening staff was arriving. The general manager, a stressed man dealing with a massive private event, barely looked at her bruised face. Kendra spun a desperate lie about being mugged and begged for a shift, claiming she needed the cash immediately. knowing her ability to charm wealthy clients into spending thousands of dollars on overpriced champagne. The manager reluctantly handed her a sleek black uniform and told her to get to work on the VIP floor. Kendra spent an hour in the employee restroom meticulously repairing her makeup to hide the scratches Tristan had left on her face. She smoothed down the tight black dress sprayed on her expensive perfume and practiced her most seductive smile in the mirror. She was ready to bounce back. She confidently walked out onto the neon-lit floor of the club, grabbing a silver tray holding a $10,000 bottle of champagne surrounded by burning sparklers. The manager caught her arm as she passed the bar. "Take this directly to the platinum booth," he shouted over the loud pulsing music. "The new owner of the club is sitting up there tonight. Make a good impression. They just bought the entire hospitality group for cash an hour ago." Kendra's eyes widened with greedy anticipation. A mysterious buyer paying pure cash for a massive hospitality group was exactly the kind of astronomical wealth she needed to secure her future. She carried the glowing silver tray up the velvet-lined stairs, her hips swaying deliberately as she approached the heavily guarded VIP section. She parted the heavy silk curtains, flashing her most brilliant, captivating smile at the shadowy figure sitting on the leather sofa. Her smile instantly vanished. The heavy silver tray slipped from her trembling hands, crashing violently onto the floor. The expensive champagne bottle shattered into 100 pieces, sending glass and alcohol splashing across her shoes. I sat perfectly relaxed in the center of the plush leather booth, wearing a sharp black suit and sipping a glass of sparkling water. My security chief Vance stood quietly behind me. I looked at Kendra's horrified, pale face and offered a chillingly polite smile. "Did you really think I would not trace the crypto wallet you used for the intellectual property theft?" I asked, my voice cutting cleanly through the loud music. "I drained it. And then I used your stolen money to buy this entire nightclub. You are fired, Kendra. Get out of my building." Kendra was physically escorted out of the nightclub by my private security team, her high heels dragging against the pavement, as she was unceremoniously dumped onto the cold Manhattan street. The neon lights of the venue buzzed above her, a harsh reminder of the glamorous life she had just lost. She had no job, no apartment, and absolutely zero access to her stolen millions. But Kendra was nothing if not a relentless opportunist. As she stood shivering on the sidewalk, a new, desperate plan began to form in her manipulative mind. If she could not beat me in the boardroom or the bank, she would destroy me in the court of public opinion. Early the next morning, Kendra walked into the gritty, disorganized offices of Gotham Gossip, a notorious online tabloid famous for publishing unverified rumors and completely destroying corporate reputations. She marched directly into the office of the senior editor, a sleazy, opportunistic man named Silas, who thrived on publishing sensationalized hit pieces. Kendra sat across from his cluttered desk and immediately turned on her flawless victim persona. She pitched him the ultimate scandalous narrative. She claimed that I was an unhinged, violently abusive billionaire heiress who had mercilessly tortured my husband and terrorized my staff. Kendra spun a spectacular web of absolute lies. She told Silas that Tristan had been desperately trying to escape my financial control and that I had orchestrated the entire corporate collapse purely out of psychotic jealousy. She conveniently omitted the part where Tristan whipped me 25 times, instead claiming that the blood in the penthouse was entirely staged to frame him. Silas listened with hungry, greedy eyes. This was the kind of viral clickbait that generated millions of page views. He immediately offered Kendra a massive six-figure payout for the exclusive rights to her fabricated story. "We are going to publish this as our headline story at noon today," Silas promised, aggressively typing notes into his computer terminal. "This is going to completely shatter the Preston family reputation. You are going to be famous, Kendra." Kendra smiled, a genuine malicious grin spreading across her bruised face. She sat in the shabby waiting area of the tabloid office sipping a cheap cup of coffee, eagerly watching the digital clock on the wall tick closer to noon. She genuinely believed she had found my weak spot. She thought my family empire relied entirely on pristine public relations and that a massive media scandal would force me to settle out of court and pay her millions just to make the story disappear. Unfortunately for Kendra, a financial empire like Preston Holdings does not survive on Wall Street without maintaining an elite, highly aggressive public relations and intelligence division. Exactly 45 minutes before the fabricated story was scheduled to go live, my chief communications officer walked into my executive suite and handed me a secure tablet. Our web scrapers had intercepted the draft of the article on the Gotham Gossip internal servers. I read through the absurd, highly defamatory allegations without breaking a single sweat. "Ms. Preston, we have our legal team standing by," my communications officer stated briskly. "We can instantly hit them with a massive cease and desist order and file a preliminary injunction to block the publication. They are clearly violating multiple defamation laws." I handed the tablet back to my officer, shaking my head with a cold, dismissive smile. A cease and desist letter only creates a temporary delay. It signals to the tabloids that we are frightened of the narrative. I do not want to temporarily block this story. I want to permanently eradicate the platform giving her a voice. I turned toward my computer and pulled up the corporate ownership structure of Gotham Gossip. The trashy tabloid was owned by a mid-level media conglomerate called Apex Communications. They were a struggling entity burdened by heavy debt and poor market performance. I picked up my secure telephone and dialed the personal number of the chief executive officer of Apex Communications. He answered with nervous, highly respectful apprehension, fully aware of who was calling him. "I am offering you a hostile all-cash buyout of your entire media conglomerate," I informed him, skipping any polite pleasantries. "You have exactly 10 minutes to accept a premium buyout offer that will instantly clear your corporate debt. If you refuse, Preston Holdings will immediately short your stock, initiate a dozen aggressive defamation lawsuits against your subsidiaries, and ensure you are personally tied up in federal litigation for the next decade." The chief executive officer did not even try to negotiate. He recognized a slaughter when he saw one. He accepted the buyout immediately. Back in the cramped, dusty office of Gotham Gossip, Silas was practically salivating as he prepared to click the publish button on Kendra's exclusive interview. It was exactly 2 minutes until noon. Kendra stood behind him, leaning over his shoulder, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. She was seconds away from destroying my name and securing her financial future. Suddenly, Silas' computer screen went entirely black. A heavy red administrative lock icon flashed across the center of his monitor. Silas frantically pounded on his keyboard, cursing loudly as his system completely froze. "What is happening to the servers?" he yelled into his phone, calling his internal technology department. "We are about to drop the biggest story of the year." The heavy glass door to Silas' office swung open. A team of sharp-suited corporate lawyers from Preston Holdings marched into the room, flanked by 2 of my private security guards. Silas dropped his phone, his jaw going slack. "Who are you people?" he demanded angrily. "You cannot just barge into a private newsroom." The lead lawyer dropped a massive legal binder onto Silas' desk. "We are the legal representatives for the new owner of this media conglomerate," the lawyer stated with absolute chilling authority. "As of 5 minutes ago, Preston Holdings officially acquired your parent company in an all-cash buyout. Your publication is now a fully owned subsidiary of our corporate empire." Kendra stumbled backward, her breath hitching in her throat, as the horrifying reality of the situation crashed down on her. The lawyer turned his cold gaze directly toward Kendra. He pulled a single crisp document from the binder and handed it to her. "That is an undeniable, ironclad defamation lawsuit," the lawyer announced. "But you will not be fighting it in the press. Because our chairman, Alyssa Preston, did not just buy this blog to stop your article. She bought the parent company to access the National Media Registry. You are now permanently blacklisted from every single media outlet, news station, and publishing house in the country. No one will ever print your name. No one will ever hear your voice. You do not exist anymore, Kendra, and you never will ever again." The chaotic energy of the federal raids finally settled into a heavy silence. I stood in the center of my father's private library, located on the top floor of his primary Manhattan residence. The walls were lined with first edition books and dark mahogany paneling, smelling faintly of expensive scotch and old paper. City lights flickered through the windows, casting sharp shadows across the Persian rug. The absolute destruction of my enemies was complete, yet my heart beat with a steady, unbothered rhythm. Alexander Preston walked over to a crystal decanter resting on a silver tray. He poured 2 glasses of neat bourbon, the amber liquid catching the dim light of the room. He did not offer me a celebratory toast. He simply handed me one of the heavy glasses and walked toward the window, looking out over the financial district we now entirely controlled together. "You executed those maneuvers flawlessly, Alyssa," my father said, his voice dropping its usual commanding edge, replacing it with a rare, quiet sincerity. "You dismantled a highly secure venture capital firm, legally trapped a hostile tech executive, and permanently silenced a corporate spy in less than 48 hours. You utilized every single legal loophole and financial weapon at your disposal without a single moment of hesitation. You did not let emotion cloud your judgment." I sipped the burning bourbon. "I learned from the best," I replied smoothly. Alexander turned away from the window and looked at me. His sharp, calculating eyes softened, revealing a fraction of the 65-year-old father hiding beneath the ruthless billionaire facade. "I was incredibly harsh on you when you were growing up," Alexander admitted, stepping closer to the center of the room. "I watched you as a child, Alyssa. You were deeply empathetic. You always cared about how other people felt. You constantly tried to fix broken things and mend broken relationships. You possessed a level of kindness that Monica completely lacked." He paused, taking a slow drink from his glass. I remained perfectly still, letting him speak. This was an unprecedented moment of vulnerability from a man who treated vulnerability like a fatal disease. "Your mother always praised your gentle nature," he continued, his tone turning slightly defensive. "But I knew exactly what that kindness would cost you in my world. Wall Street does not reward empathy, Alyssa. The corporate elite do not care about fairness or moral high grounds. If I had handed you the keys to Preston Holdings when you were 22, your compassionate heart would have been a massive bleeding target. Men like DeAndre and Tristan would have smelled your empathy from a mile away. They would have manipulated your kindness, drained your assets, and completely destroyed the empire I built." I set my crystal glass down on a nearby leather ottoman. "So you cut me off," I stated flatly. "You forced me to live in a microscopic apartment, work a grueling mid-level consulting job, and hide my true identity just so I could learn how the real world operates. You wanted me to suffer. I wanted you to survive," Alexander corrected me, his voice rising with sudden intense conviction. "I needed you to understand what it feels like to be completely powerless, so you would never ever allow anyone to put you in that position again. I watched you marry Tristan. I watched him belittle your career and exploit your financial support. It took every ounce of my self-control not to intervene and crush him myself. But if I had saved you, you would have never learned how to forge your own armor. You had to learn how to be utterly ruthless." He walked right up to me, placing his heavy hands on my shoulders. "You had to experience absolute agonizing betrayal to understand what it takes to rule. And when you called me from that penthouse bleeding and broken and told me to destroy his life, I knew my daughter was finally ready to take the throne. You proved that you have the iron will necessary to protect our family legacy. I am incredibly proud of you." I stood there in the quiet, dimly lit library, absorbing his twisted, complex validation. My father genuinely believed that my suffering was a necessary curriculum for corporate supremacy. He thought my brutal, calculated revenge against my abusers was a performance designed to win his approval and secure my position as chairman. I looked at the man who had orchestrated my entire life from the shadows. I felt a profound sense of clarity wash over me. I slowly reached up and removed his hands from my shoulders, taking a deliberate step backward to establish a firm, undeniable boundary between us. "I appreciate your honesty, Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any seeking validation. "But you profoundly misunderstand what happened in that penthouse, and you completely misjudge my motivations." Alexander frowned, his hands dropping to his sides. What do you mean? I did not orchestrate the destruction of a venture capital firm to prove my financial acumen to you, I explained, looking him directly in his eyes. I did not bankrupt my treacherous ex-husband to demonstrate my ruthless corporate leadership. I did not systematically eradicate my enemies to pass your twisted test of succession, or to prove I was finally worthy of the Preston name. I took another step back, ensuring my words carried the absolute chilling truth of my newfound independence. The empathetic girl you tried to beat out of me did not die, I told him. She just learned how to hold a sword. Alyssa Alexander started looking genuinely unsettled by my cold detachment. I gave you the tools to win. I gave you the power to execute your revenge. I looked at my father. I didn't do this for you. I did this because nobody gets to put 25 lashes on my back and live to tell the tale. 3 months passed before I saw him again. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was a fortress of polished marble, heavily guarded by federal marshals. The air inside the courtroom was thick with anticipation. The gallery was packed to capacity with financial journalists and curious spectators eager to witness the final destruction of a fallen tech executive. I sat dead center in the front row. I wore a perfectly tailored ivory Tom Ford suit that radiated absolute power and untouchable wealth. My posture was perfectly straight. I did not look like a victim seeking justice. I looked like a queen waiting for an execution. The heavy wooden door at the side of the courtroom creaked open. 2 large federal marshals stepped through, followed closely by Tristan. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible. The man who shuffled into the courtroom looked nothing like the arrogant chief executive officer I had married. The tailored Italian suits were gone, replaced by a glaringly bright orange Department of Corrections jumpsuit that hung loosely off his emaciated frame. His wrists and ankles were bound by heavy steel chains that clanked loudly with every pathetic step he took across the floor. Tristan looked completely hollowed out. His face was sunken and pale, devoid of any color or life. The severe stress of federal lockup and the absolute loss of his financial empire had aged him 20 years in a matter of months. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, entirely unable to handle the glaring spotlight of his own ruin. He was directed to the defense table where his court-appointed public defender was already sitting. Because I had successfully seized all of Tristan's personal accounts and offshore crypto wallets, he had zero funds to hire a private defense attorney. He was entirely at the mercy of an overworked public defender who currently looked like he had not slept in 3 days. The lawyer was frantically shuffling through a disorganized stack of manila folders, spilling papers onto the floor before hastily shoving them back into his briefcase. The presiding judge, a stern man with zero tolerance for corporate criminals, banged his wooden gavel to bring the room to order. The prosecution team representing the federal government stood up and methodically outlined the staggering mountain of evidence against Tristan. They detailed the millions of dollars in wire fraud, the illegal offshore transfers, and the severe felony assault. The lead prosecutor painted a vivid, horrifying picture of a deeply narcissistic man who ruthlessly abused his wife to maintain a fragile illusion of power. I watched Tristan carefully as the prosecutor described the 25 lashes. He visibly flinched, shivering in his bright orange jumpsuit, as if the mere memory of his own unhinged violence terrified him. He finally gathered the courage to lift his head and look across the courtroom. His bloodshot, deeply hollow eyes met mine. He looked at my pristine white suit and my calm, unbothered expression. He let out a shaky, ragged breath, realizing I was entirely immune to his pathetic display of suffering. When it was the defense team's turn to speak, the overworked public defender stood up and adjusted his wrinkled tie. He knew he had absolutely no factual defense against the financial crimes, so he attempted a highly desperate character assassination strategy. Your Honor. The defense attorney began pacing awkwardly in front of the jury box. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client is a violent, manipulative monster. But I implore you to look closely at the alleged victim sitting in the front row. Alyssa Preston is not a helpless, abused woman. She is the sole heiress to a ruthless billion-dollar financial empire. She spent 5 entire years lying to my client about her true identity. She actively engaged in a massive fraudulent deception. The public defender pulled a document from his messy briefcase and waved it high in the air. In fact, my client legally annulled their marriage the very morning of this alleged assault, precisely because he discovered her massive web of lies. This so-called assault is nothing more than a highly fabricated revenge plot. Ms. Preston was furious that her husband wanted to leave her. She possesses the financial power to orchestrate this entire scenario. She framed my client to destroy his company and steal his life work. There is absolutely no physical proof that Tristan Hughes ever laid a hand on her. A murmur rippled through the courtroom gallery. Tristan sat up slightly straighter, clinging to the sudden microscopic shred of hope that his lawyer's desperate narrative might actually create reasonable doubt among the jurors. He looked at me again this time, with a faint pathetic glimmer of his old arrogance returning to his sunken face. I did not break eye contact with him. I simply offered a cold, razor-sharp smile. The lead federal prosecutor immediately stood up from his table, objecting loudly to the defense attorney's baseless speculation. He turned to the judge, his expression projecting absolute lethal confidence. "Your Honor, the defense claims there is no physical proof of the assault," the prosecutor stated, his voice echoing cleanly through the massive courtroom. "The government would like to submit a new piece of highly critical evidence into the official record. Evidence that was directly recovered and preserved by Ms. Preston's private security team on the exact night of the attack. The key." The prosecutor reached into a large cardboard evidence box resting on the table. He pulled out a clear, sealed plastic evidence bag. Inside the transparent bag was the white silk blouse I had worn on the night of the attack. The back of the delicate fabric was heavily shredded, completely soaked in dark, dried blood. The horrific visual reality of the violent assault was undeniable. The entire courtroom fell into absolute stunned silence. Tristan's face went completely dead white. He slumped backward in his wooden chair, the heavy steel chains rattling loudly against the floor as the last remaining ounce of oxygen left his lungs. "This garment contains massive amounts of the victim's blood," the prosecutor announced, holding the sealed bag high for the jury to see. "But more importantly, Your Honor, it is accompanied by a certified forensic report from the Federal Crime Lab. The report confirms that the skin and sweat cells recovered directly from the leather belt used in the attack are an absolute flawless DNA match to the defendant Tristan Hughes." The courtroom erupted into a chaotic frenzy of whispered gasps and furiously scribbling journalists. Tristan stared at the sealed plastic bag containing my shredded, blood-soaked blouse, his mouth hanging open in complete paralyzing disbelief. His entire defense strategy had just been incinerated in front of the jury. He turned to his overworked public defender, violently shaking his head and whispering frantic denials. But the lawyer simply stared down at his legal pad, knowing the case was entirely unsalvageable. The lead federal prosecutor turned back to the judge and officially called his primary witness. "The prosecution calls Alyssa Preston to the stand," he announced, his voice carrying a note of profound respect. I stood up from the front row of the gallery. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored ivory suit and walked toward the witness box with measured, deliberate steps. I did not look at the floor. I did not hunch my shoulders or attempt to play the fragile weeping victim the jury likely expected to see. I walked with the absolute authority of a woman who owned the very ground she stood upon. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and took my seat behind the wooden partition. The prosecutor approached the stand. "Ms. Preston," he began gently, "can you please describe for the court exactly what happened on the evening of your return from your business trip?" I looked directly at the jury box. 12 ordinary citizens leaned forward, completely captivated. I delivered my testimony with flawless, emotionless precision. I did not shed a single tear. I did not let my voice tremble. I clinically detailed how I walked into the penthouse, how Kendra fabricated a fall to incite a violent reaction, and how Tristan immediately resorted to brutal physical abuse. I described the 25 lashes with the leather belt, providing exact chronological details. I explained how he threw a zero-asset divorce settlement at my bleeding face, attempting to leave me destitute while mocking my supposedly working-class background. My cold clinical delivery was far more devastating than any theatrical display of sorrow could have been. The jurors were visibly horrified by the stark, undeniable reality of the violence I described. The prosecutor thanked me and returned to his table. The judge turned to the defense attorney asking if he wished to cross-examine the witness. The public defender stood up hesitantly. He approached the podium, sweating under the intense scrutiny of the courtroom. He knew he was walking into a minefield, but he had to try something to mitigate the catastrophic damage. Ms. Preston, the defense attorney, started clearing his throat nervously. "You claim you were utterly terrified of my client. Yet records show you did not immediately call for an ambulance or flee the penthouse. You remained in the residence. Is it not true that you calmly orchestrated a massive financial retaliation before the police even arrived? Does that sound like the behavior of a terrified, abused wife?" I looked at the sweating lawyer, my expression perfectly serene. "I never stated I was terrified, counselor," I replied, my voice echoing clearly. "I stated I was assaulted. Fear is a luxury afforded to people who do not know how to fight back. I did not flee my own home because I refused to be chased out by a coward. I stayed. I contacted the appropriate authorities, and I ensured that the man who attacked me would face the absolute maximum consequences of his actions. Seeking immediate legal and financial justice does not invalidate the fact that your client brutally whipped me 25 times. A low murmur of approval rippled through the gallery. Several jurors nodded in agreement. Tristan could not handle it. The sight of me sitting on the witness stand, completely untouchable and utterly dominant, shattered the last remaining fragment of his fractured sanity. He had spent 5 years believing he was the superior, powerful executive, and I was the submissive, disposable wife. Now, sitting in a bright orange jumpsuit while I dismantled his life wearing a pristine designer suit, his narcissistic ego completely imploded. "She is lying." Tristan suddenly roared, jumping to his feet. The heavy steel chains wrapped around his ankles and wrists clanked violently against the wooden defense table. His face turned a dangerous mottled purple as he pointed a shaking chained finger directly at me. "She planned the entire thing!" Tristan screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as spittle flew from his lips. "She is a manipulative witch. She hid her billionaire family from me for 5 years just to trap me. She paid Kendra to steal my code. She planted that blood on the belt. She is trying to destroy my entire life because I wanted to leave her. You are all blind. She is the real monster." "Order," the judge bellowed, slamming his heavy wooden gavel down repeatedly. "Mr. Hughes, you will sit down and remain silent immediately, or I will have the bailiffs gag you and remove you from this courtroom." But Tristan was entirely beyond reason. He strained against the federal marshals who rushed forward to restrain him, continuing to scream unhinged accusations at me, at the prosecutor, and at the jury. He looked like a rabid, cornered animal. I sat perfectly still on the witness stand, watching him completely self-destruct. I did not flinch or look away. I just stared at him with cold, absolute pity. The jury watched his violent, explosive outburst with wide, horrified eyes. Any lingering doubt the defense attorney planted about my testimony was instantly eradicated by Tristan's terrifying display of unhinged aggression. He had just shown the jury exactly what kind of monster he was behind closed doors. The judge ordered the marshals to force Tristan back into his seat. The defense rested their case immediately. The trial concluded rapidly. Tristan's outburst in front of the jury sealed his fate. The jury foreperson handed the verdict to the judge after only 2 hours of deliberation. The heavy silence in the federal courtroom was absolutely deafening as the judge accepted the folded piece of paper from the jury foreperson. Every journalist, spectator, and legal aide held their breath in complete silence. Tristan stood at the defense table, his knees shaking so hard that the heavy steel chains around his ankles rattled against the hardwood floor. He looked like a cornered animal, his chest heaving rapidly as he stared up at the judge. The judge unfolded the document slowly, his expression a mask of absolute, unyielding authority. He looked at Tristan, then down at the paper, and finally addressed the packed gallery. On the first count of felony domestic assault and battery, the judge read, his voice projecting clearly across the massive room. "We find the defendant, Tristan Hughes, guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the spectators. Tristan swayed on his feet, reaching out to grip the edge of the wooden table just to keep himself from collapsing entirely. On the second count of massive wire fraud and corporate embezzlement, the judge continued, completely ignoring the defendant's distress. We find the defendant guilty. On the third count of criminal financial negligence, guilty. The judge went down the extensive list of severe federal charges, reading the word guilty over and over again. Each declaration struck Tristan like a physical blow. By the time the judge finished reading the 14th and final guilty verdict, Tristan was openly weeping, tears streaming down his sunken, pale face. He looked at his public defender, begging the overworked lawyer to do something, but the attorney simply packed his legal pads into his briefcase, knowing his job was entirely finished. Normally, a federal court would schedule a separate sentencing hearing after a guilty verdict, but this was not a normal case. The overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of physical brutality, combined with Tristan's explosive outburst in front of the jury, prompted the judge to take immediate action. The judge slammed his wooden gavel down, commanding the murmuring gallery to remain perfectly quiet. "Mr. Hughes," the judge announced, leaning forward over his elevated bench, "given your highly volatile behavior in this courtroom today, and the undeniable, horrific nature of the physical evidence presented by the prosecution, I am waiving the standard pre-sentencing investigation period. We are proceeding to your formal sentencing right now." Tristan choked out a loud, pathetic sob. "Your Honor, please," he begged, his voice cracking violently. "I am a first-time offender. I was under immense corporate stress. I just need psychological counseling. I can be a productive member of society." The judge cut him off with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Do not insult the intelligence of this court, Mr. Hughes. You did not beat your wife because of corporate stress. You did it because you are a fundamentally cruel, narcissistic man who believed his financial wealth placed him entirely above the law. You systematically abused a woman you believed was powerless, and when you realized she had the resources to fight back, you attempted to use the legal system to leave her completely destitute. You are the exact definition of a violent predator hiding behind an expensive designer suit." I sat in the front row of the gallery, maintaining my flawless, composed posture. I listened to the judge dismantle Tristan's entire identity piece by piece. "For your extensive financial crimes, including defrauding your investors and illegally hiding corporate assets," the judge stated firmly, "I am sentencing you to 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary." Tristan let out a sharp, agonizing wail, but the judge was not finished. He picked up the certified forensic report detailing the brutal assault. "However, the financial crimes pale in comparison to the sheer calculated brutality of your domestic violence." The judge continued, his voice dropping to a lethal, unforgiving register. "You took a heavy leather belt and you deliberately struck your wife 25 separate times. You left her bleeding on the floor of your penthouse while you mocked her background and threatened to destroy her life. That level of prolonged, intentional cruelty requires a highly specific and profound punishment." The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the digital clocks ticking on the walls. "I am sentencing you to an additional 15 years in federal prison for the felony assault charges," the judge declared, striking his wooden gavel with finality. "Those sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. That is a total of 25 years in federal prison, Mr. Hughes. Exactly 1 year behind bars for every single lash you delivered to her back. You will have no possibility of early parole." Tristan completely snapped right there in the middle of the courtroom. The catastrophic reality of spending the next 2.5 decades locked inside a federal cage crushed him. He began hyperventilating violently, gasping for air as his legs entirely gave out beneath him. He collapsed heavily onto the courtroom floor, sobbing loudly. The heavy steel chains binding his wrists and ankles rattled frantically against the wood as he curled into a pathetic, weeping ball. He could not breathe, paralyzed by a massive panic attack. The judge gestured sharply to the federal marshals standing nearby. "Remove the prisoner from my courtroom immediately," the judge commanded. They forcefully dragged him up from the floor, his feet dragging uselessly behind him as they hauled him toward the heavy wooden doors leading to the holding cells. As they dragged him past the front row of the gallery, Tristan desperately lifted his head. His wild, bloodshot eyes frantically searched the crowd until they locked directly onto mine. I stood up slowly from my hard wooden bench, adjusting the pristine lapels of my tailored ivory suit. I looked down at the ruined, completely destroyed man who had once thought he could break me. I did not speak a single word aloud. I simply stood there, looked right into his terrified, broken eyes, silently mouthed the number 25, and gave him a cold, victorious smile. Tristan's screams echoed down the marble hallway, fading into a pathetic whimper, as the heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind him. The trial of the decade was officially over. I remained standing in the front row for a long moment, letting the absolute silence of my total victory wash over me. The monster who had tortured me in secret was now locked in a federal cage for the next 25 years. I adjusted the pristine lapels of my tailored ivory suit, turned on my heel, and walked out of the courthouse into the crisp Manhattan air. 2 weeks later, the dust had completely settled. I sat behind the massive custom oak desk in the chairman's suite at Preston Holdings. The panoramic windows behind me offered an unobstructed view of the financial empire I now controlled with absolute authority. The morning sun illuminated the room as I poured a cup of black coffee from a silver carafe. Sitting directly across from my desk were Marcus, my lead corporate counsel, and Diane, my chief financial investigator. "We are wrapping up the final loose ends of the corporate restructuring," Madam Chairman Marcus announced, opening a thick, heavily redacted legal binder. "I want to give you the final updates on the external liabilities, specifically your sister and your former brother-in-law." I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my legs. "Proceed, Marcus. Tell me exactly how the mighty have fallen." Marcus adjusted his glasses, a grim, highly satisfied smile touching his lips. "We will start with Monica. As you predicted, she absolutely did not have the stomach for a protracted federal trial. Once you legally revoked her status as a beneficiary of the Preston Family Trust, she lost all access to our elite legal defense team. The public defender assigned to her case took one look at the global positioning system tracker data from the stolen diamond necklace and told her she had zero chance of winning in front of a jury. She cracked under the pressure of the federal indictment. Diane chimed in, sliding a smooth black tablet across my desk. She spent 3 days in the Rikers Island, holding cell, before she completely surrendered. She took the absolute first plea deal the federal prosecutors offered her. I looked down at the tablet. It displayed a sterile, unflattering mugshot of my older sister. The flawless, arrogant socialite was gone. Her hair was flat and unwashed. Her designer makeup had been scrubbed away, revealing the terrified, ordinary woman hiding underneath. She looked exhausted and entirely defeated. 5 years, Marcus stated, tapping the binder. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in a minimum security federal correctional facility in upstate New York. She was transferred there yesterday morning. The warden confirmed she is struggling severely to adapt to the rigid schedule. Apparently, on her second day, she demanded to speak to the facility manager because the cafeteria was not serving organic, gluten-free options. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "And her work assignment?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. "She was assigned to the facility laundry detail," Diane answered, her eyes gleaming with cold amusement. "The woman who previously refused to wear the same couture gown twice is now spending 8 hours a day washing hundreds of identical heavy canvas prison jumpsuits. She makes exactly 20 cents an hour. Furthermore, all of her personal accounts were completely zeroed out by the federal government to pay the mandatory restitution fines for her grand larceny charges. She has absolutely zero assets to her name. A fitting end for a woman who built her entire identity on stealing from others," I noted calmly. "What about DeAndre? Did the Securities and Exchange Commission finish dismantling his firm?" Marcus turned to the next page in his binder. "DeAndre is a completely ruined man. When you denied his immunity plea deal and purchased the bank holding his mother's mortgage, his entire arrogant facade disintegrated. He signed his venture capital firm over to your charitable foundation exactly as you demanded. In exchange, we allowed his mother to keep her modest estate. But DeAndre himself was left entirely destitute. The Internal Revenue Service audited 7 years of his financial records. They uncovered the massive web of offshore accounts he used to hide his illicit transactions with Tristan. They seized everything Diane added, pulling up a new file on the tablet. They auctioned off his fleet of luxury cars. They seized his custom-tailored suits, his expensive watches, and his shares in every single startup he ever backed. The federal government hit him with catastrophic fines for wire fraud and tax evasion. "Show her the photograph," Marcus instructed. Diane tapped the screen and slid the tablet back toward me. I looked at the high-resolution surveillance photograph taken by one of our private investigators. The image showed DeAndre, the former master of the universe who used to command boardrooms and destroy rival companies with a single phone call. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting polyester polo shirt. He was sitting slumped behind a cramped, scratched laminate desk in the windowless basement of a regional logistics company. He managed to avoid prison time by cooperating fully with the federal authorities against his former business partners, Marcus explained. But he is currently working a minimum wage data entry job. Every single paycheck he earns is immediately garnished by the federal government to pay off millions of dollars in massive IRS penalties. He takes a public bus to work every morning. He lives in a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment in a neighborhood he used to actively mock at your dinner parties. He clocks in at exactly 8 in the morning, Diane reported, reading from her notes. He gets one strict 30-minute lunch break. If he is even 1 minute late, his shift supervisor docks his hourly pay. The man who used to handle $400 million investment portfolios is now spending his entire day answering angry customer service emails about delayed shipping orders. Our investigator noted that he looks completely broken. He does not even raise his voice when furious customers yell at him over the phone. I stared at the photograph of the ruined venture capitalist. DeAndre had used his background as an excuse for his monumental greed, stepping on anyone he deemed weak to elevate his own status. He had enabled a monster and manipulated my family for his own financial gain. Now he was permanently trapped at the absolute bottom of the corporate food chain, working a meaningless job just to survive. "That wraps up the final loose ends," Madam Chairman Marcus said, closing the heavy legal binder with a definitive thud. "The board of directors is absolutely thrilled with your aggressive quarterly projections. Your corporate enemies are completely neutralized. The empire is entirely yours." "Thank you both for your excellent work," I said, dismissing them with a slight nod. Marcus and Diane stood up, gathered their documents, and quietly exited the executive suite. I remained alone in the massive office, enjoying the pristine silence of my completely secured kingdom. A moment later, the heavy oak doors opened softly. My new executive assistant, a highly efficient woman who knew better than to ask questions, walked in carrying the morning mail. She placed a small, neatly sorted stack of envelopes directly in the center of my oak desk, nodded respectfully, and left the room. I began sorting through the corporate correspondence. Halfway through the stack, a cheap, thin white envelope caught my eye. It was stamped with the stark black official seal of the New York State Department of Corrections. The handwriting on the front was messy, frantic, and unmistakably desperate. It was addressed to me. I picked up my heavy silver letter opener. I slid the sharp blade smoothly through the top of the envelope. I pulled out a single piece of cheap lined notebook paper. The handwriting inside was shaky, stained with what appeared to be dried tears. "Alyssa, please," the first line read. "I have absolutely nothing left in here. The food is terrible and I am so cold. Please put some money in my commissary account. I am begging you. I am your sister." I stopped reading. I did not read the second line. I did not read the pathetic apologies, the frantic justifications, or the desperate pleading that surely filled the rest of the page. The time for sisterly compassion had expired the moment she tried to destroy my life. I slowly stood up from my leather chair. I walked across the plush carpet toward the heavy-duty industrial shredder sitting discreetly in the corner of my office. I held the lined notebook paper over the thin slot. I let it go. The sharp steel blades whirred to life, instantly pulling the letter down and completely shredding her desperate pleas into 1,000 meaningless strips of confetti. The ambient noise of the private dining room faded instantly as the heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung shut behind me. I stepped out onto the pristine pavement of Midtown Manhattan, adjusting the collar of my tailored black silk trench coat against the evening chill. The air was crisp, carrying the electric, undeniable energy of a city that bowed only to power and capital. Inside that restaurant, I had just finalized a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition over a plate of seared scallops and vintage champagne. The executives sitting across the mahogany table had practically tripped over themselves trying to agree to my aggressive terms. It was the kind of absolute, unadulterated success that only comes when you hold all the leverage and refuse to compromise on a single detail. My private security chief Vance stood a few paces ahead, speaking quietly into his discreet earpiece as he coordinated the arrival of my vehicle. The avenue was bustling with the usual manic evening crowd. Wealthy patrons leaving Broadway shows financial analysts hailing cabs and tourists marveling at the towering skyscrapers. I stood under the warm, glowing light of the restaurant awning, feeling a profound, untouchable sense of serenity. The hostile corporate wars, the grueling federal trials, the dramatic family betrayals, they all felt like a distant, chaotic movie I had already finished watching. I was no longer the abused wife or the underestimated, forgotten daughter. I was the chairman of a financial empire. A block down the busy street, the flashing yellow lights of a Department of Sanitation truck cut through the darkness. A crew of workers in highly visible neon orange safety vests was moving slowly along the curb, clearing heavy debris and wet refuse from the city gutters. It was a standard court-mandated community service detail, the exact kind assigned to nonviolent felony offenders working off their federal sentences. I watched them idly as they approached the front of the restaurant, dragging heavy plastic municipal bins and wielding long, stiff, bristled push brooms. One worker in particular caught my eye. She was moving significantly slower than the rest of her crew. Her posture slumped in a state of utter bone-deep exhaustion. Her ill-fitting orange vest swallowed her frame, heavily stained with dark patches of engine grease and city grime. Underneath the mandatory vest, she wore a cheap, faded gray sweatshirt that offered little to no protection against the biting Manhattan wind. Her hair, which was tied back in a messy, frayed knot, looked incredibly stringy and unwashed. She was violently shivering, her shoulders shaking as she struggled to maneuver a heavy, soaking wet pile of trash into an oversized dustpan. The worker paused, leaning heavily against the thick wooden handle of her broom just to catch her breath. She wiped a heavily gloved hand across her forehead, inadvertently smearing a thick streak of black dirt directly across her pale, hollowed face. It was Kendra. The realization hit me with the quiet, satisfying precision of a puzzle piece locking into its final place. The treacherous woman who had proudly paraded around my luxury penthouse, who had willingly stolen my husband, actively facilitated the theft of $2 billion in intellectual property, and mocked my bleeding back, was now physically scraping wet garbage off the asphalt of my city. The polished, manipulative executive assistant, who had ruthlessly dreamed of a $4 million offshore payout, was entirely permanently gone. The luxurious salon blowouts, the tight designer dresses, the arrogant, untouchable smirk, every single trace of her former identity had been brutally stripped away by the federal justice system. She looked absolutely miserable. Her manicured nails, once her absolute pride and joy, were broken, jagged, and caked with dark mud. Her designer stilettos had been replaced by cheap, scuffed industrial work boots that looked at least 2 sizes too big, causing her to drag her feet with every agonizing step. She was serving her hard time on the very same streets she had once arrogantly believed she would rule. Kendra bent down to pick up a discarded crushed coffee cup, letting out a sharp, audible groan of severe physical pain. Her back was clearly aching from the relentless manual labor. As she straightened back up, her exhausted, bloodshot gaze drifted toward the restaurant awning. Her eyes scanned the expensive stone facade, the glowing ambient lights, and the uniformed valet waiting by the curb. And then her eyes locked directly onto mine. I did not move. I did not flinch. I stood perfectly still, bathed in the warm light of the high-end establishment, wearing a coat that cost more than she would make in 5 years of sweeping streets. Kendra froze entirely. The heavy push broom slipped from her trembling, blistered hands, clattering loudly onto the concrete sidewalk. The color drained completely from her dirt-streaked face, leaving her looking like a terrified frozen ghost. Her mouth fell slightly open, but no sound came out. The sheer crushing humiliation of the moment paralyzed her nervous system. She had spent the last several months in a minimum security facility, trying to convince herself that she could survive her federal sentence, that she could eventually bounce back and reclaim a tiny fraction of her glamorous life. But seeing me standing there completely untouched, immensely powerful, and absolutely thriving, completely shattered whatever fragile, pathetic delusion she had left. She looked down at her stained, oversized orange vest, then looked back up at my immaculate silk coat. Her chest began to heave erratically, her breathing hitch transforming into a pathetic, desperate gasp for air. Thick, hot tears welled up in her bloodshot eyes, spilling over her dark lashes and cutting clean, wet tracks through the thick grime on her hollow cheeks. She took a tiny, hesitant step forward, her filthy hands raising slightly in my direction. It was a pathetic, instinctive gesture. She wanted to speak. She wanted to beg for forgiveness, to scream at me for ruining her entire life. Or perhaps just to plead for a single microscopic ounce of human pity. She wanted to know that her profound daily suffering mattered to me. She desperately needed to feel like she still existed in my world, even as a vanquished, broken enemy. A sleek, jet-black Maybach glided smoothly to the curb, its heavily tinted windows reflecting the vibrant city lights. Vance stepped forward, immediately opening the heavy rear door with practiced silent efficiency. Kendra let out a wet, broken sob, her thin shoulders shaking violently as she stood surrounded by the rotting trash she was legally assigned to sweep. She stared at me, her red-rimmed eyes practically begging for just 1 second of acknowledgement, one nod to validate her miserable existence. I looked at her weeping, dirty face. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. She was completely and utterly irrelevant. I turned my head smoothly, breaking the eye contact without a single fraction of hesitation. I did not offer her a triumphant, vindictive smile. I did not speak a single mocking word. I simply stepped into the luxurious, leather-lined interior of the Maybach and settled comfortably into the plush, heated seat. Vance closed the heavy door behind me with a solid, definitive thud, instantly sealing out the chaotic noise of the street. Through the heavily tinted glass, I could see Kendra standing frozen on the curb, dropping to her knees and weeping uncontrollably as she realized the brutal, undeniable truth. I did not roll down the window. I did not look back. I picked up my digital tablet to review tomorrow's corporate acquisition schedule as the driver pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving Kendra crying in the garbage, rendering her entirely invisible. The ambient hum of Midtown Manhattan was completely muted behind the bulletproof, soundproof glass of the chief executive suite at Preston Holdings. I stepped across the threshold, my black leather heels sinking slightly into the pristine hand-woven Persian rug that spanned the massive room. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me with a solid, definitive thud, sealing me inside the absolute pinnacle of corporate power. This was no longer my father's sanctuary. It was mine. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, trailing my fingertips along the edge of the polished mahogany desk. The surface was perfectly clear, stripped of Alexander Preston's antique nameplate and his decades of accumulated dominance. In their place rested my own sleek, minimalist silver pen and a single secure digital tablet. The air in the room felt entirely different today. It was crisp, cold, and vibrating with the undeniable energy of a completely secured empire. The hostile takeovers, the brutal federal raids, the orchestrated public humiliations, and the surgical destruction of every single person who had attempted to break me were officially concluded. The chessboard was entirely clear of enemy pieces. I moved past the desk and approached the panoramic floor to ceiling windows that dominated the southern wall. The city stretched out before me, a sprawling, glittering jungle of glass, steel, and ruthless ambition. The setting sun cast a brilliant, bleeding amber glow across the skyscrapers, illuminating the financial district where I now sat as the undisputed apex predator. Millions of people were rushing through the concrete canyons below, entirely unaware of the absolute corporate bloodbath that had just taken place 50 floors above their heads. I placed my hand flat against the cool glass, looking down at the empire I had forged in the fires of my own spectacular trauma. My mind drifted back to the penthouse, to the metallic clink of Tristan's heavy leather belt unbuckling. I could still hear the sickening crack of the leather slicing through the air. I could still feel the excruciating white-hot agony of the leather biting into my bare skin, tearing open my flesh, and leaving me bleeding onto the imported hardwood floor. 25 lashes. He had counted them out loud, striking me with deliberate, unhinged malice, genuinely believing each blow was beating me into permanent, terrified submission. He was profoundly mistaken. Tristan did not beat me into submission. He brutally whipped the empathy entirely out of my system. Every single drop of blood that soaked into my ruined silk blouse that night had served as a dark baptism, washing away the quiet, accommodating, supportive wife I had spent 5 years pretending to be. The physical pain had shattered my naive illusion that fairness or moral high grounds held any actual currency in this world. When I lay on that floor broken and bleeding, something dark and unyielding snapped awake deep inside my chest. The predator my father had always wished for finally opened its eyes. Tristan had intended to leave me completely destitute, stripped of my dignity, and crushed under the weight of his stolen, illegitimate tech empire. Monica had intended to continuously humiliate me, pawning my heritage to fund her unearned arrogance. DeAndre had intended to siphon my wealth to build his fraudulent venture capital firm. Kendra had intended to walk away a millionaire built on the ruins of my marriage. Even Alexander Preston had intended to use my severe suffering as a twisted sociopathic proving ground for his corporate succession. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I had consumed them all. I had systematically dismantled their bank accounts, their careers, their reputations, and their freedom. I thought of Tristan sitting in a maximum security federal cell, staring at concrete walls, forced to count out the next 25 years of his miserable life. I thought of Monica stripped of her designer gowns, spending her days scrubbing heavy canvas prison jumpsuits for 20 cents an hour. I thought of DeAndre, stripped of his venture capital firm, answering angry customer service calls in a windowless basement just to pay off the Internal Revenue Service. I thought of Kendra scrubbing the filthy gutters of the city streets in a grease-stained vest, utterly invisible to the wealthy elites she had desperately tried to con. And I thought of my father sitting alone in his quiet library, realizing he had successfully created a monster that no longer needed his approval, his money, or his guidance. I had weaponized my own trauma, turning the worst night of my life into a masterclass in hostile absolute destruction. I had manipulated federal agencies, acquired entire media conglomerates just to silence a single voice, and bought financial institutions purely to foreclose on a personal enemy. I had executed every single maneuver with flawless, emotionless precision. The dull, lingering ache beneath the tailored fabric of my Tom Ford suit was still present. The deep, jagged scars crisscrossing my back would never fully fade. They were permanently branded into my skin, raised and angry, but I no longer viewed them as marks of victimization. They were my battle armor. They were a visceral daily reminder of exactly what I was capable of surviving, and more importantly, exactly what I was capable of inflicting on anyone who dared to cross me. The scars had healed, but the ruthless, calculating monster they had awakened was entirely ravenous. I turned away from the window and walked back to the heavy leather chair sitting behind the mahogany desk. I did not just survive the slaughter. I became the slaughter. And as I sat down, resting my arms on the armrests, I realized a profound, intoxicating truth. I did not want to stop. The taste of absolute victory was sweet, but the hunger for total domination was absolutely insatiable. Wall Street was an endless landscape of bloated egos, fraudulent empires, and weak, vulnerable corporations begging to be aggressively acquired and entirely dismantled. My reign had only just begun. A soft, highly respectful knock broke the pristine silence of the executive suite. "Enter." I commanded, my voice echoing with smooth, undeniable authority. The heavy oak door swung open to reveal my newly appointed executive assistant. She was a fiercely intelligent, razor-sharp woman who operated with military precision and asked absolutely zero unnecessary questions. She walked across the Persian rug, with deliberate, measured steps, her expression perfectly neutral. She stopped precisely 2 feet from the edge of my mahogany desk. She carried a single, sleek black leather folder in her hands. "Ms. Preston," she announced, her voice crisp and professional. "Your next target profile is ready. The analysts have verified the corporate vulnerabilities, and the hostile acquisition strategy has been fully drafted for your final approval." I reached across the polished wood and took the heavy folder from her hands. I flipped open the black leather cover, my eyes instantly scanning the highly classified financial intelligence, the compromised offshore ledgers, and the detailed personal weaknesses of a rival billionaire who currently believed his empire was completely untouchable. He had absolutely no idea a storm was coming. A slow, genuinely lethal smile spread across my face. My eyes gleamed with the pure, unadulterated thrill of impending corporate warfare. I looked up at my assistant, feeling the absolute vibrating power of my position coursing through my veins. "Let's get to work." True family is defined by mutual respect, not just shared blood. In these stories, toxic relatives consistently prioritize their own comfort or favored children over the victim's well-being. For example, family members might forge signatures to steal property, skip hospital visits, to go to an amusement park, dismiss a daughter's tech career, or fund a lavish wedding instead of saving a dying grandson. The ultimate, empowering lesson is that true personal power comes from setting firm boundaries and walking away. Your inherent worth is never simply determined by their blindness, but by the successful, authentic life you build for yourself. If you have ever found the courage to set firm boundaries and forge your own path after a painful family betrayal, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share your story below.